Chapter 31. Pirates. Life at sea is always boring. Even Hela, who was going out to sea for the first time, would feel bored after getting over the initial curiosity and looking at the ocean that had not changed at all. As for Roland, after a boring day, he also found the crew on the ship. After asking, he finally found a way to kill time. Fishing. Roland, lying on the deck chair, held a fishing rod in his hand and lazily basked in the gentle sunshine. Next to him, Hela also held a fishing rod. While fishing, she also looked at the ocean silently. Weak magic flowed in her eyes. Through a simple perspective spell, Hela was observing various fish 10 meters below the ocean. This is what Roland asked her to do. By regulating the magic power and controlling the degree of perspective, Hela learned how to see through the swimming fish and accurately see their internal organs or epidermis, so as to train her magic control. In addition, Roland would occasionally suddenly select a fish randomly and let Hela use mental power to control it to bite the hook and catch it, so as to train her reaction ability. The fish caught will become Hela's experimental subjects for casting spells, allowing Hela to continue casting spells and experimenting, and improve her proficiency in spell models. Although Hela is constantly destroying her, due to Roland's request, Hela must learn to save every bit of magic power and control the power of the spell. Therefore, most sea fish can basically be attacked by 6 or 7 weak spells on average, and then be cured by Roland's spell and thrown back into the sea. Only a few unlucky ones will be killed by a spell because Hela cannot control the power of the spell. In this regard, Roland naturally cremated them directly. Just when Roland closed his eyes and rested lazily, he suddenly opened his eyes and looked towards the northwest. Hela, let's stop here today. Although he didn't know what happened, Hela still stopped the spell obediently and put away the fishing rod. On the distant horizon, a fleet of more than a dozen ships was sailing towards this side. At the same time, a dwarf crew member also ran over. Sir, team leader Psyche asked me to tell you that we have encountered pirates. Please go back to the room and hide first. Roland nodded, grabbed Hela's hand, and immediately returned to the cabin. Before completing the sublimation to become a mid-level extraordinary person, low-level extraordinary people are quite fragile. If they are accidentally hit by elemental cannons, the probability of being killed directly is not low. Although Roland prepared various props for him and Hela, it is not a problem to withstand a few shots, and ordinary pirates are likely to have no money to equip elemental cannons, but, what if? Who knows what the real identity of the other side is, whether there will be elemental cannons, and how many elemental cannons there will be. After returning to the room, Roland was not particularly panicked. Judging from the confident look of the dwarf crew members he saw when he returned to the room, this warship is probably indeed equipped with a lot of elemental cannons, and it is still possible to fight pirates. Moreover, even if Psyche can't beat the other side, Roland and Hela can just tear up the spell scroll and run away. For this voyage, Roland prepared several spell scrolls recording the 4th ring spell space transfer. Unless they met a 5th ring spellcaster who was proficient in space spells, they could not be stopped from running away. Standing at the window of the room, Roland and Hela silently looked at the approaching pirate ship. As the pirate fleet approached, Roland gradually saw more information. He frowned slightly. In his spiritual vision, these pirate ships that came from afar were basically scarred, and the pirate crews on them were also anxiously busy, working overtime to make simple repairs on the ships. How did it look like they had just escaped from a war? However, Roland did not relax because he saw more things. On these dozen damaged ships, basically every ship was equipped with a large number of elemental cannons. At the same time, in their cabins, Roland also sensed a large number of extraordinary people. In the entire pirate fleet, Roland sensed nearly 100 apprentices, 30 first ring transcendents, 5 second ring transcendents, and 1 fourth ring transcendent. Damn, where did this group of transcendent pirates come from? This level is enough for you to dominate the area, why come here instead of making a fortune in the popular waterways? Roland was confused. This force is not something that a dwarf ship can resist. It's not a good idea to run away directly, so let's wait and see. Roland thought silently. After the distance between the two sides kept shrinking, the dwarfs finally realized that something was wrong, and immediately turned around, speeding up, and tried to run away. However, the pirate fleet that had chosen them long ago would not let them go so easily. After the dwarfs turned around, they also accelerated and rushed over. Fortunately, the advanced strange machine power has completely surpassed the ordinary wind power and magic power. Therefore, although the pirate fleet also accelerated, it still failed to catch up with the dwarfs. After completing the turn, the distance between the two sides began to widen rapidly. Seeing this, dozens of figures rushed out from the pirate fleet and rushed over from midair at an astonishing speed. As they rushed over, the muzzles of the dwarf warships quickly opened, and a large number of gun barrels were pushed out, and then a large amount of elements were injected into the gun barrels. Boom! The elemental cannon fired. Under the dense artillery fire, several of the dozens of figures that rushed over disappeared in an instant. However, even though their lives were in danger, the figures that rushed over did not hesitate and rushed over frantically. Under continuous attacks, after losing more than half of their lives, a superhuman finally approached the ship. Looking at the human superhumans rushing over in front of him, Roland stretched out his right hand, gestured to assist in casting spells and multicasting spells, and 7 second-ring spells of the necromancy system were aimed at one first-ring superhuman after another. In the blink of an eye, the superhumans selected by Roland instantly lost signs of life, their bodies stiffened, and they all fell directly into the sea. Roland glanced at the remaining others, who were basically first-ring superhumans, with only 1 second ring. As long as the fourth ring on the opposite side did not come over, it was not impossible to fight. Roland picked up the elf staff and walked out of the room with Hela. At the same time, a fully armed dwarf soldier also quickly ran to the deck. On the deck, the dwarf soldiers were divided into small teams, fighting against the extraordinary people who landed on the deck one by one. The strange weapons on their bodies flashed with light, and they held up the shield to resist the attacks of the extraordinary people. Chapter 32. Although ordinary dwarf soldiers can barely fight against the first-ring extraordinary people by relying on strange equipment, they can only delay. It is too difficult to counterattack. However, since the dwarfs dare to go to sea, they will not only have ordinary dwarf soldiers, but also extraordinary people. Several first-ring dwarf spellcasters stood in the center of the deck, constantly casting spells on the enemies around them. The dwarfs, originating from the blue coast of Sinur, have extremely high spell talents, even stronger than elves, but compared with the elves with equally high physical talents, the dwarfs have very poor physical talents. Therefore, all the dwarf extraordinary people on the ship are spellcasters. As the dwarfs continued to cast spells, the enemies landing on the deck were beaten back step by step. After Roland and Hela left the field, the situation that was originally advantageous instantly turned to the dwarfs. Compared to the dwarf spellcasters who were somewhat restrained in casting spells to avoid destroying the ship, Roland and Hela were not so restricted. There are many spells against single targets in the necromancy system. Standing in place, Roland turned into a high-speed turret and cast spells at the enemies around him, while Hela stood aside and cast spells to attack the enemies in a very professional manner. In less than 5 minutes, all the enemies on the landing deck were completely wiped out, and 2/3 of their heads were taken down by Roland. Hela only took 2 heads because of her slow casting. After all the enemies who landed were killed, the only 4-ring extraordinary person on the pirate fleet side finally couldn't sit still. As the huge magic power was released on the pirate ship, the surrounding sea water began to boil, waves rose up, and finally turned into tall waves, rushing towards the dwarf warship continuously. Tisk, the sublimated extraordinary people are different. Looking at the approaching waves, Roland shrugged his shoulders and pulled Hela against the wall to stabilize his position. Such continuous waves are not so easy to calm down. Roland will not waste his trump card for an ordinary commission. While the dwarf warship was struggling in the waves, a stronger magic power descended on this sea area from afar. Hey! With the uniform call, a group of dolphin knights rushed into the battlefield at an astonishing speed. Behind them, a blue whale more than 20 meters long also followed calmly. The strong magic power was released by the elf knights on the blue whale. Oh, the army of the moon elves. Roland knew that the situation was set. And the fact is indeed so. I saw a cold light shot out from the blue whale and hit the pirate ship where the 4-ring pirates were at an astonishing speed. The 4-ring pirates on the pirate ship quickly lost signs of life, and then a huge explosion broke out in the pirate ship, and the entire pirate ship sank. The dolphin knights surrounded the remaining pirate ships, ignoring the pirate ship's hysterical attacks, and they cast a joint spell. A huge vortex slowly emerged, crushing the remaining pirate ships and the pirates into pieces. After dealing with the pirates, the Moon Elf army looked at the dwarf warships, and the dwarf soldiers and mages on the deck saluted and thanked the Moon Elves. The knights on the Moon Elf side also saluted in return. Finally, they turned around and left the sea. After all, the relationship between the moon elves and the dwarves is not bad. If they encountered a human warship, they would definitely come to check it out before leaving. Roland glanced at the dwarf soldiers who were about to clean the deck, and pulled Hela back to the room. After returning to the room, Hela sat on a chair and asked Hela curiously. "What is that?" "The moon elves' ocean nights." Roland explained casually. "You can understand it as the extraordinary nights running on the sea." Hela continued to ask thoughtfully. "Apart from the moon elves, are there any marine nights?" "At present, only the moon elves have one." Roland pulled out a chair and sat down, adding. "Most countries still focus on land warfare. Only maritime countries like the moon elves, which are far away from the continent, will focus on developing the navy. Among the maritime countries, except for the moon elves, other maritime countries cannot afford to support them." Hela flipped through the books on the table, opened a book about elves for Roland to read, and asked. "The moon elves seem to be different from what is described in the book." Roland glanced at the book and explained. "Sun elves are definitely different from moon elves." Roland took the book, flipped through a few pages, and continued. "Although there are some stereotypes, sun elves are indeed as despicable as described in the book. If you meet sun elves in the future, it is best to keep a distance. You can get in touch with moon elves. Although they are equally arrogant, they can still make sense." Hela tilted her head and said with some doubt. "They are all elves, how can we tell them apart? The ears of moon elves are flat, while the ears of sun elves are slightly upward. Even if moon elves meet strangers, their attitude is generally good and they can communicate, while sun elves will basically put on a sour face and act arrogantly." Roland said, recalling the game memories of his previous life, and his tone gradually became gnashing. Fuck, in the last life, because of the moon elves, Roland loved the sun elves and thought that they were good elves. As a result, Roland was almost screwed by a sun elves NPC. The damn sun elves sent him a series of tasks, and the rewards for the tasks would be given after all the tasks were completed. As a result, the last task asked Roland to kill all the kings of the sun elves. Roland finally killed a king and was wanted. As a result, the sun elves NPC used this as an excuse to forcibly break the series of tasks. When Roland went to question him, the stupid NPC provoked him and even wanted to catch him to claim the bounty. In the end, Roland, who was furious, directly called people to kill their whole family hundreds of times to vent his anger. As a result, the game officials also knew how disgusting the sun elves were, which led to Roland directly triggering the revenge task, and actually killed and robbed their whole family in the task state, barely recovering the cost of doing the task. Roland's bounty increased a lot, and his reputation with the sun elves also fell to the bottom. In the captain's room, Shi looked at the equipment he had just put on helplessly, and said in a complicated tone. "Help me take it off." The two dwarves beside him shrugged and began to take off his equipment tacitly. Looking at the moon elves going away, Shi thought silently in his heart. Is this key luck? It was a close call, fortunately he didn't hit too hard, otherwise he would really have to fight against that 4-ring guy. He is a 2-ring mechanic who also studies prophecy, so he really doesn't have much confidence that he can win. Chapter 33. After encountering pirates once, the journey to the island of the dead was much smoother. After a few boring days of sailing, Roland finally arrived at the sea area where the island of the dead was located. Standing on the deck, Roland and Hela were looking at the island and the surrounding sea area where a large number of dark elements gathered in front of them. A large number of fish that had been transformed into undead were active in the shallow sea area, and on the island, there were corrupted trees and various undead creatures everywhere. "Sir, it's time to set off." A dwarf soldier ran to Roland and said. "Yes." Roland nodded, then pulled Hela and followed the dwarf soldiers into a landing craft. Without waiting for the dwarf soldiers to explain, Roland skillfully found a seat and sat down, and pulled out the seat belt to fasten himself, and at the same time, helped Hela to fasten it beside him. Psyche looked at him with some surprise, but he didn't say anything. Maybe Roland had worked with other dwarves before and had come into contact with similar things, so he shouted directly. "Let's go." "Okay." The driver responded, and then the landing craft started instantly and rushed directly to the island of the dead. Several small elemental cannons installed also began to accumulate energy. Bang! As the elemental cannons fired crazily, the undead fish intercepted on the landing craft in the shallow sea area were blown into countless powders. And the undead fish that were lucky enough to escape the bombardment could not stop the landing craft at all. These fragile undead creatures could kill everyone with a fork, not to mention fighting against the sturdy landing craft, which was directly knocked away by the landing craft. Under the operation of the driver, the landing craft quickly broke through the shallow sea area outside the Island of the Dead and rushed directly to the beach. After landing on the Island of the Dead, the door of the landing craft was immediately opened, and the dwarf soldiers and spellcasters quickly walked out of the door, attacking and cleaning up the undead creatures attracted around. Roland and Hela naturally got off the boat to help. Soon, they cleared a piece of open space. Afterwards, the dwarves began to move various research equipment from the landing craft and placed them on the cleared space. After moving all the things on the landing craft out, the landing craft retreated back into the shallow sea, once again broke through the shallow sea and reached the battleship. After running back and forth for more than a dozen times, all the personnel and various equipment were successfully moved to the island. The dwarf machinists reassembled the disassembled parts and transported them up, and it didn't take much effort to move a large trailer. After moving all the equipment onto the trailer, a group of people protected the trailer and began to advance deep into the Island of the Dead. Because the undead creatures on the Island of the Dead are naturally born due to the gathering of high-concentration dark elements, they naturally rely on the dark element environment. Once they leave the dark element environment, they will quickly lose power and turn into ordinary corpses. Therefore, the undead basically only move around the Island of the Dead and will not actively expand to the surrounding areas. It is for this reason that the Silver Empire allowed the existence of these several undead islands. According to the distribution of dark element concentrations on the undead islands, the strength of the undead creatures is getting stronger from the outside to the inside. Ordinary undead creatures on the periphery do not need the help of extraordinary people. The dwarf soldiers can just push them away like cutting melons and vegetables. Only after entering the undead forest, in order to allow the trailer to enter smoothly, the dwarf spellcasters took turns to cast spells to clear the way. The dwarf soldiers with flamethrowers burned the rotten trees with flames, and the spellcasters behind them turned the land and cleared a flat road. Under the orderly advancement of the dwarves, the team quickly advanced to the depths of the undead island. As the team advanced, the undead creatures they encountered became stronger and stronger. The number of apprentice-level undead increased, and 1 or 2 first-ring undead occasionally appeared. The highly corrupted and undead vegetation became more and more difficult to burn. After smashing the last approaching first-ring undead with a cannon, Si looked at Roland, who had basically not taken any action along the way, and said, "Sir Roland, we need your assistance on the next journey. Please try your best to prevent the undead creatures around us from affecting us." Roland nodded slightly, and the elf staff gently touched the ground, and a wave of waves spread out in all directions. Creating and driving undead creatures is the basic skill of necromancy. In his previous life, in professional competitions, Roland had also achieved the actual operation of setting off an undead disaster without any foundation many times. Even if he is only a second-ring spellcaster now, he still has experience. It is not difficult for Roland to influence the naturally born undead to keep away. He can just order them to leave. Under Roland's mental command, all the undead within a radius of 100 meters with the trailer as the center shook their bodies and turned away under Roland's command. The effect of Roland's spell casting was naturally immediate. The waves of undead that appeared almost every few minutes no longer appeared. After reducing the disturbance of the undead, the dwarf spellcaster also increased the frequency of spell casting. The dwarf soldiers with flamethrowers reduced the number of flamethrowers because they were no longer able to burn, and the dwarf spellcasters used the energy spell to destroy the trees blocking the way. With the cooperation of the spellcasters, the team's advancement speed was also improved. When the sky was about to get completely dark, the team successfully reached the edge of the center of the island. In the center of the island, a 3-ringed undead made of various bones was walking aimlessly. It was nearly 2 meters tall. In its hard bull skull, a ball of turbid black soul fire was slowly burning. 17 bone legs from various creatures were slowly moving with its huge body. The team looked at this undead creature and began to prepare for the hunt. The dwarf spellcasters took out potions and began to recover their spirits and replenish their magic power. The dwarf soldiers began to assemble elemental cannons and moved the prepared physical shells from the trailer. Psyche and the other 3 dwarf spellcasters who had not cast spells along the way began to wear exquisite primitive strange armor with the help of some dwarf soldiers. Hela, like ordinary dwarf spellcasters, took out alchemical potions to recover her spirit and replenish her magic power. At the same time, according to Roland's request, she quietly checked the trump card Roland gave her. As for Roland, he didn't consume much, so he drank a bottle of ordinary alchemical potion and replenished a little magic power. After replenishing the consumed magic power, he observed the three-ring undead in the distance with interest. In his previous life, when he was leveling up on the island of the dead, he was just a mage apprentice and didn't know much about supernatural knowledge, so he couldn't see anything. But now, Roland can see something. Chapter 34. Although the dark elements on the surface of the dead island have an absolute advantage, deep underground where the dark elements are the thickest, there is a strong vitality hidden in the place surrounded by countless dead air. After a long period of entanglement, the vitality and the death have been intertwined and transformed into each other. This is a naturally formed and extremely rare supernatural phenomenon. If it were discovered by other supernatural beings, this supernatural phenomenon would naturally be meaningless, but for Roland, it would be of great use. This place where life and death are intertwined and transformed is the best ritual site for obtaining a rare magic pet. In the previous life, those players who specialized in the necromancy system spread death everywhere in order to obtain rare magic pets, trying to create this situation artificially. However, in Roland's memory until the end of the previous life, there were only 3 necromancers who had this rare magic pet, of which 2 were professional players and only 1 was a local tyrant player. Although Roland is a full system magician, this kind of magic pet is not suitable for Roland, but it is quite suitable for Hela. Anyway, it can be used for rituals, and the effect of creating a pet is similar to purification. It's not easy to come across it, so we can't waste it. Roland had a plan in mind. After the sky completely darkened, all the team members completed their pre-war preparations. Psyche looked at Roland and asked, "Have the undead around us been dispersed?" "Yes." Roland nodded slightly. "Then, let's start the battle." Psyche carried a cannon and shouted, "Fire flares!" As his voice fell, several elemental cannons that had already been loaded with flares immediately fired at the sky. Bang! With the roar of the cannon, several physical ammunition were fired into the air. As the physical ammunition detonated, the built-in flash spell quickly unfolded. The dazzling light instantly illuminated the entire area. "Fire, blow it up!" Psyche aimed at the 3-ring undead on the field, shouted, and pulled the trigger first. Afterwards, the assembled elemental cannons, operated by the dwarf soldiers, began to roar continuously, venting a large number of shells at the 3-ring undead. The various dwarf mages and Hela also cast spells to attack the 3-ring undead. Under the overwhelming bombardment, the 3-ring undead roared to the sky, and the bones all over the body quickly turned into dark black. Bang! 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 After several minutes of crazy bombardment, the completely overloaded elemental cannon finally stopped, and the dwarf mage who had vented all the magic power in his body finally stopped bombing. And Hela, who had only used half of her magic power, also stopped casting spells in a very sociable manner. After the bombing, the state of the 3-ring undead also appeared in front of everyone. Its dark bones had mostly restored their original color, and the surface bones were also covered with a large number of scars and cracks. The 2 different bone horns on the bull's head were also turned into powder, and several of the calves supporting the body were also blown to pieces. Its state was visibly bad. Then, Psyche and 3 other dwarf spellcasters who were also equipped with strange armor, as well as Roland and the other 5 people, jumped down the hill and killed it. First level spell Bone Growth. When the 3rd level undead was about to repair its own injuries, Roland took the lead in casting a spell and filled the cracks in its bones in advance. Then, Roland habitually snapped his fingers. 2nd level spell Corpse Explosion. The skeleton that grew with his magic power instantly expanded, and after reaching the limit, it exploded. Because of the explosion, a lot of bones fell off its body, but it ignored it and opened its mouth, and countless dark elements began to gather. 2nd level spell Counter. Seeing that it began to gather elements, Roland directly interrupted its casting with a spell counter after it gathered a large number of elements. The elements in its mouth instantly lost control and exploded uncontrollably. Its mouth was directly blown up. Under Roland's constant interference, it was almost unable to make any effective attacks before the 4 strange machine gunners approached it. They drew their weapons and began to strike accurately. The 3 strange machine gunners continued to attack its remaining legs, weakening its mobility, and Psyche jumped directly in front of it and punched its chest. The already weakened chest was instantly blasted open by him, and then, the palm of his fist opened, and the special holy light alchemy potion gushed out from it and directly injected into its body. Under the erosion of the holy light potion, a large amount of dark elements floated out of its bones. With the support of Roland's spells, the three-ringed undead could hardly make any effective attacks, and could only be constantly dismantled by the strange machine gunners. Bang! With the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground, all its legs were broken and removed. Then, Psyche punched through its chest, tore open its neck, and separated its head from its body. Finally, Roland reached out his hand, caught the falling head, put his right hand into the head, and easily pulled out its soul fire. After losing the soul fire, the head and body that had been separated but still struggling stopped moving instantly. Roland clenched his right fist and directly compressed the soul fire into a small crystal. I didn't expect that Lord Roland could suppress it. Psyche jumped down from the corpse of the three-ring undead and said with some admiration. Originally, he thought it would be a fierce battle, but he didn't expect Roland to be so fierce that he suppressed the three-ring undead to death without casting a single necromancy spell. Even if it was because the low-level undead had no wisdom and the spells were stiff, it was still quite powerful to be able to easily suppress it across levels. Roland smiled slightly, did not answer, and threw the soul crystal in his hand to Psyche. Psyche caught the soul crystal, rubbed it with his right hand, and threw it to Roland again, saying, "This kind of soul crystal is of no use to us, Your Excellency, take it." Roland caught the soul crystal thrown back, raised his eyebrows slightly, and responded, "In that case, I won't be polite. The three-ring soul crystal is still quite valuable. Whether it is sold to the School of Undead Research in the Tower of Truth, or saved for Hela in the future, it is a good choice." Thinking of this, Roland directly put it into the space ring. After destroying the three-ring undead entrenched in the center of the island, the team not far away also moved again. The dwarf soldiers pushed the elemental cannons and placed them around the core area to build a defense network. Other dwarf soldiers pushed the trailer down the hillside and came to the core area. Finally, Hela walked quietly to Roland, and several dwarf soldiers assisted the artificer to take off his armor. The rest of the people began to dismantle various experimental equipment and reinstall them, preparing for the expected 3-day experiment. Chapter 35. After dealing with the three-ring undead, the dwarves quickly began their research projects. Roland had nothing to do except spending 1 or 2 hours a day to assist the dwarves in some experiments and giving orders to the surrounding undead to keep them away from the core area. Therefore, Roland, who had a lot of free time, began to prepare for the ceremony in advance. At the same time, he invaded and controlled the various undead on the undead island, and manipulated them to collect various extraordinary materials on the island. Of course, all this was done in secret. Although Psyche noticed it, he didn't say anything. After all, Roland had done what he should do. As long as it didn't affect the experiment, Roland would do whatever he wanted, and he even took the initiative to ask the dwarves not to disturb Roland at will. As for Hela, Roland controlled a few ordinary undead and sent them to her for practical training. Although necromancy is a legal and compliant force in the Silver Empire, there are also many schools specializing in necromancy in the Tower of Truth. However, in the stereotype of most people, necromancy is still equated with evil. Ordinary necromancy is fine. Unless you are familiar with necromancy, most people think it is no different from other spells. However, controlling the undead is different. Even ordinary people know that only necromancy can control the undead. Although there are various ways for the undead to be born, it is a stereotype that all undead are transformed from the corpses of intelligent life forms. However, in order to maintain harmony and stability, many cities prohibit the entry of ordinary undead. Therefore, Roland could only let Hela learn about the existence of the undead from books. However, now, the island of the dead is isolated from the world, and there are so many undead, so Hela can mess with them at will. On the 3rd day of landing, the dwarf officially started the 2nd day of the experiment. Sitting on a folding chair, Roland was closing his eyes and remotely controlling the dozens of undead he controlled through their vision. Some of them were collecting extraordinary materials scattered all over the island, from dark element herbs, special trees containing strong dark elements, to various minerals that had been eroded and changed. As long as there was something of value, the undead would uproot it and collect it. Others used these collected materials to set up ritual nodes one by one according to the ritual map designed by Roland. Suddenly, a strange force came from the dwarf. After noticing this, Roland raised his head slightly, took a little energy and opened his eyes. In front of an assembled mechanical device, Psyche was throwing a 10-sided dice. Prophecy spell? Strange. The dice thrown by Psyche turned several times on the mechanical device, and finally, the result came out, 3. Send. Looking at this number, Roland subconsciously thought in his heart. This kind of prophecy spell that interferes with the result is quite unreasonable. If the spell is not used, the result of the experiment is hard to say, but once it is used, the result is completely doomed. Although 3 is not a big failure, it is also within the range of failure. In this case, even if the original experiment could succeed, it is now doomed to fail. However, it is not impossible to reverse it. Psyche's face did not change at all. He immediately stretched out his right hand to grab the dice. Then, around his fist, several illusory dice began to emerge, and several dice with results from 6 to 10 slowly emerged. Then, a dice with a result of 9 began to change and became 3. Finally, Psyche loosened his right hand again, and the original 3 also became 9. The result changed and it was a great success. The mechanical device, which was originally a little slow, roared quickly, and the thick dark elements around it were madly absorbed by the machine, and it started to run rapidly. The strange machine masters surrounding the mechanical device showed a fanatical look, staring at the mechanical device with a pair of eyes, waving their hands constantly, and recording the precious experimental data. The dwarves who can cast prophetic spells are basically masters of strange machine inventions. Why didn't he hear of Psyche's existence in his previous life? Looking at Psyche, Roland thought silently. Perhaps Psyche died in the turmoil in the future. After all, the life of the dwarves was not so stable. Of course, it may also be that Psyche did not like to show up in public and was not famous, so Roland did not know him very well. After all, Roland only knew 3 relatively famous dwarf mechanics. Roland raised his eyebrows slightly and turned his head to look at Hela beside him. At the outermost edge of the experimental site, Hela was fiddling with the skeleton undead in front of her. Next to her, a small mountain of rotten meat and bones had been piled up. After 2 days of practice, Hela took less than 10 seconds to dismantle all the skeleton undead in front of her. After placing the head storing the soul fire aside, she picked out the remaining skeletons and selected a few bones of better quality. After polishing and strengthening these bones with necromancy, she installed them on the undead shelf beside her. After consuming nearly 1,000 undead, Hela finally assembled a somewhat shaped undead frame. Then, Hela picked up the 2 heads placed aside, one was just taken down, and the other was a dark black head that she had slowly cultivated over the past 2 days. After the 2 heads collided, the burning soul fire in the dark head instantly burst out a suction force, sucking the soul fire in the other head into its mouth. After using magic to promote its consumption, Hela installed the dark head on the undead rack beside it. As the soul fire released its power, it quickly adapted to the new body that Hela had polished piece by piece, and a ring of the ultimate breath of the undead emerged on it. Raise your hands. Looking at the undead slave standing there in a daze, Hela tilted her head and gave an order tentatively. The undead slave looked at Hela blankly, then looked down at his body, and raised his hands hesitantly. While Hela kept giving orders to learn to control the undead slave, Roland, who was paying attention to her, nodded with satisfaction. Hela's dark element talent is too strong. He originally thought that she would be lucky to be able to make an apprentice-level undead by hand, but he didn't expect that she could already make a ring of undead within less than 2 days. Moreover, most of the materials Hela used were bones of ordinary undead, and only 1/5 were from apprentice undead. Roland retracted his gaze and closed his eyes again, pretending to meditate while continuing to remotely control the undead. Chapter 36. On the 4th day after landing on the island of the dead, it was noon on the 3rd day when the dwarfs started the experiment. After 2.5 days of experimentation, the dwarfs completed their experimental purpose ahead of schedule. When the gnomes dismantled the mechanical device again and moved it onto the trailer. "Do you really don't need us to wait for you?" Chi stood beside Roland and asked. "Searched can on Google." "Thank you, but no need. Purification takes a long time, and I have my own way to leave." Roland smiled slightly and politely declined Chi kindness. "I understand, then, let's leave first. Oh, by the way, this is my signal. I hope we will have opportunities to cooperate in the future." Chi nodded slightly and showed no intention to continue asking. After handing a piece of paper to Roland, he turned around and directed the dwarfs to move the things away. Roland looked at the piece of paper in his hand, memorized the number on it, and then put the piece of paper into the space ring. This is one of the functions open to the outside world by the Spellcasters Association, remote communication. Although this kind of communication is very limited in Roland's opinion, it can only be used in the respective Spellcasters Associations. It is expensive and complicated to use. It costs 1 gold coin to send a message, and it cannot exceed 100 words. The effect is almost the same as QQ, which only has a castrated version of the chat function and can only transmit text messages. Moreover, since it is handled by the association, when transmitting some important messages, encrypted codes must be used, which is very inconvenient. However, in this medieval world, this communication method is already quite advanced. Of course, this kind of thing that can be disclosed to the outside world will naturally not be very advanced within the Spellcasters Association. According to Roland's memory from his previous life, the current Spellcasters Association already has a mobile phone-like device that can use remote communication at any time, and can also log into some high-end communication channels similar to forums. Just because the cost is too high and the technology is not very perfect, it is currently only supported for purchase and use by mid to high-level extraordinary people. When Roland is promoted to the 4th ring, he can register and buy one. After spending more than half an hour dismantling and moving everything, the dwarf team left directly along the road they had opened before. Roland naturally continued to follow, carrying out his commissioned task to help them disperse the approaching undead. As for Hela, although Roland did not ask, she immediately left her undead slaves and followed Roland. A few hours later, standing on the beach of the Island of the Dead, Roland and Hela watched the dwarf warship move away and disappear from their sight. Then, Roland turned around and said, "Okay, now it's time to do our business." Hela nodded and followed Roland into the core area of the Island of the Dead again. In the center of the island, a large number of undead creatures have filled almost every corner. After the dwarf left, the undead controlled by Roland moved over all the extraordinary materials collected in the past 3 days. After calculating the amount of materials required for the ritual, Roland controlled the undead to divide the extraordinary materials into 2 piles, and then collected the smaller pile with a wave of his hand. "Okay, Hela, please continue practicing. If you have any questions later, ask me again after I have completed the preparations for the ceremony." Roland commanded Hela while directing the undead creatures to move the extraordinary materials around. "Can I help?" Hela looked at the movements of the undead creatures and asked curiously. "This ceremony is more complicated." Roland shook his head and rejected Hela's proposal. He paused, realized that he seemed a bit direct, and said comfortingly, "Rituals are not the main knowledge that extraordinary people learn. Compared with other extraordinary people, you are already very good." Hela blinked and said nothing. She quietly took the ring of undead she assembled to a corner and continued to study necromancy. "It should be fine, right?" Looking at the quiet Hela, Roland thought silently. He shook his head, cleared his head of some messy thoughts, and walked towards the group of undead ahead. The ritual of creating a magic pet using the special extraordinary phenomena of the Island of the Dead is quite complex. With Roland's current level of 2nd level, it is not easy to complete this ritual. He had to concentrate and devote himself to the ritual, otherwise he would probably fail. Counting the materials previously stored in the space ring, he only has 2 chances at most. In the next few days, Roland began to devote himself wholeheartedly to the preparations for the ceremony. He first spent half a day renovating the core area and sorting out an open space that would serve as the core of the ceremony. After clearing the clearing, Roland micromanaged the 7 heads and 1 ring of undead, spending 7 days completing the arrangement of the core of the ritual 1 stroke at a time. After completing the core arrangement, Roland also spent a day conducting a detailed inspection of the entire ceremony core to ensure that there were no problems with the most important core construction. After ensuring that the core was correct, Roland began the work of connecting the core to the nodes. Although the connection work is a little simpler, the workload is indeed quite huge. Even if there were a large number of undead creatures to control, it took Roland another 3 days to complete the connection work. In the end, Roland spent another 3 days examining the entire ceremony in all aspects. Standing in front of the core of the ritual, Roland looked at the ritual that took him almost 15 days, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, it was done. "Ritual. Is it done?" Hela walked to Roland's side, looked at the complicated ritual in front of him, and asked. The pure grey undead she created was standing silently beside him. Compared with it 15 days ago, its breath was more hidden and steady now, and its scattered breath was completely restrained. It was almost the last step away from the 2nd ring. If Hela hadn't broken through the 2nd ring, it would have been promoted long ago. Yet. Roland nodded, and he pulled Hela to the other side, in front of an independent ritual superimposed on it, pointed at it, and said, See, this is it, inject your magic power into it. Hela nodded. Without asking Roland what he wanted to do, he stretched out his hand and injected the magic power in his body into the ritual in front of him. The magic power in Hela's body was flowing at an astonishing speed. In less than a minute, more than 4/5 of the magic power in her body was absorbed. After so much magic power was suddenly sucked away, Hela's face turned pale. Even though so much magic power was absorbed, the ritual in front of her showed no sign of stopping the absorption. Why are you standing there like an idiot? Here's the magic pool I gave you before, use it. Looking at Hela, who didn't use any external objects to restore her magic power, Roland reminded her helplessly. Chapter 37. Hearing Roland's words, Hela blinked and reacted. The bracelet on her right hand flashed slightly, and the magic stored in it began to flow back into Hela's body. This was a strange device that Roland had made before, an energy storage device for storing elements or magic, an important energy component of the strange device. Although Roland's skills were poor, the magic pool he rubbed out by hand could not store much, and in the previous life, it would probably be judged as scrap, but it was better to have it than not. Moreover, Roland and Hela were only low-level extraordinary people, and the magic pool Roland rubbed out by hand was enough for them to restore their full magic from the magicless state several times. At a low level, the effect was immediate, and Roland and Hela had several more blue bars than others. As soon as these magic powers flowed into the body, they were quickly drawn away by the ritual. The ritual stopped drawing after absorbing almost 5 more magic powers of Hela. Drop a drop of blood on it. Roland continued to order. The pale Hela nodded with some effort, bit her right index finger, and squeezed out a drop of blood that fell on the ceremony. Okay, leave it to me next, you take a rest first. Looking at Hela, who was pale and a little unsteady, Roland quickly asked her to take a rest first. Hela nodded, and with the help of the undead, she walked behind Roland and sat down on the open space. She shook her head and felt a little uncomfortable. In front of her, Roland also started his work. On his right hand, the same bracelet as Hela flickered slightly, and a large amount of magic power poured into Roland's body. Although Roland's body was a little uncomfortable due to the sudden surge of magic power, compared with Hela, Roland at least had the experience of his previous life. After frowning and adapting, he looked at the ceremony in front of him. By continuously extracting the dense dark elements from the island of the dead for several days, the core and various nodes of the ritual have been charged. Now, Roland only needs to use his magic power as a match to start this large-scale ritual. Under Roland's micro-manipulation, the magic power in his body was continuously refined, and along the connection structure of the core and the nodes, it slowly covered the entire ritual. Then, the ritual started. The dark elements of the entire island of the dead instantly boiled up, and almost all the undead became agitated because of this. Even the undead controlled by Roland, because Roland's energy was focused on the ritual, they also turned around agitatedly. Only the undead rubbed by Hela's own hands remained normal, standing beside her blankly. As the dark elements were absorbed by the ritual in large quantities, the concentration of dark elements in the entire island of the dead was also rapidly decreasing. Under the island, other elements suppressed by the dark elements began to counterattack and continued to surge out from the ground. However, as soon as they emerged from the ground, they were absorbed and swallowed by various nodes. Each node continuously devoured all the elements around it, transformed them into energy, and continuously flowed to the core of the ritual through the connecting structure. At the core of the ritual, after obtaining sufficient energy, the ritual core also began to capture the vitality and death below it, which had been intertwined and transformed with each other. Under Roland's delicate operation, the balance of vitality and death was not broken. It was smoothly drawn out from the ground by the ritual and accommodated in the core. Black and green air currents flowed on the core of the ritual, and they began to change under the drive of the ritual. The shallow air current began to compress and became clear and thick. Finally, the endless elements were continuously injected into it after being transformed by the ritual core, and the small ritual that stored Hela's magic and blood was successfully launched. The magic and blood were compressed and transformed into a thin dark red mark, which floated into the airflow. Seeing that everything went well, Roland also breathed a sigh of relief and retracted his attention. The remaining steps were not difficult, just waiting for the ritual to slowly inject energy. Roland took a few steps back. It was not pleasant to have his magic drained out. This was the weakness of low-level transcendence. They had too little magic power and could not directly use the elements of the surrounding environment. The magic power of starting a ritual could drain them dry. After taking a look at the ritual that was functioning normally, Roland also walked to Hela's side. He did not care about the mud and sat down beside her. Hey! Roland breathed a sigh of relief and took out a bottle of recovery potion from his space ring. After drinking a bottle, he sat on the mud and rested. He was exhausted from being busy for the past 10 days. This was the first time he arranged a ritual bit by himself. In his previous life, when he was still a low-level transcendent, he could not play with high-end technology such as rituals. But when he became a mid to high-level transcendent, or a professional player, although he understood rituals, most of the tedious and simple arrangements could be solved directly with the energy spell. At most, only some of the more critical ones would be done by himself. Alas, unless he is promoted to the 4th ring and completes the first sublimation, he will never arrange any medium or large ceremony. Roland and Hela rested and recovered while silently waiting for the end of the ceremony. As the ceremony progressed, the dense dark elements of the undead island were swept away, the concentration of dark elements returned to normal, and the environment that nurtured the undead was completely destroyed. After the environment was destroyed, the natural undead that were completely dependent on this environment also began to self-collapse. The first to collapse were ordinary undead. Without any extraordinary power, they all collapsed in less than an hour after leaving the high-concentration dark element environment. The apprentice's undead lasted 2 more hours, 7 hours for the first ring, and 13 hours for the second ring. When the ceremony covering the entire island slowly ended, all the natural undead on the entire island of the dead had died. Only the one-ring undead that Hela rubbed out by herself could still move normally. Artificially created undead have a complete element cycle and are not very dependent on the element environment. Although as the price of the element cycle, the mana reserves of artificial undead will be 1/10 less, and the stamina is insufficient. However, since the first Lich King launched the Undead Scourge, sweeping across half of Sinur, and then being directly destroyed by the Silver Empire at its peak, the necromancers have been shackled. Although they can still create undead, in order to avoid the second Undead Scourge, they are strictly prohibited from permanently modifying the environment. Even if it is an experimental site, the experimental site must be moved every 10 years and restored to its original appearance. However, with the decline of the Silver Empire, this restriction gradually lost its mandatory nature, and the Tower of Truth chose to turn a blind eye to various illegal experimental sites. Chapter 38. Looking at the oval light ball on the core of the ritual, which gradually became solid. Roland and Hela stood in front of it, watching it calmly. Hela, touch it and prepare for promotion. Roland whispered on the side. Hela tilted her head. Although she didn't quite understand what Roland meant, she didn't say much and reached out her hand to touch the light ball with trust. After Hela's right hand touched the light ball responded quickly, and a refined magic power poured into her body. Because Roland had reminded her in advance, Hela didn't panic and calmly touched the magic power. Although she didn't know what Roland did, this refined magic power seemed to come from her own meditation and naturally integrated into her body. At the same time as the magic power was injected, she suddenly sensed a presence closely connected to her. The light ball in front of her shrank and turned into a petite grey crow. It flapped its wings and landed on Hela's arm. Then, it tilted its head to look at Hela, opened its mouth, and made a cry. Ga! Ga! Looking at the grey crow, Hela was a little slow to react, and subconsciously opened her mouth and imitated its cry. The grey crow was stunned for a moment, blinked her eyes, and her small eyes were full of doubts. Hela also realized that her reaction was a little subtle, and her face was a little embarrassed. However, she soon put this embarrassment behind her. When Roland created the grey crow, he integrated the red mark made by Hela's magic and blood into its body. The grey crow has been closely connected with Hela since its birth. In addition, Roland used the magic pet contract ritual that had been modified by countless players. The existence of the grey crow is completely dependent on Hela. If Hela dies, it must die too. This means that unless Hela abuses it particularly, the grey crow is basically impossible to betray. As the grey crow established a connection with her, its mental power was shared with Hela, and her mental power that reached the limit of 1 ring was nourished, and she was a little eager to move. Hela seized this opportunity, closed her eyes, and took advantage of the opportunity of increasing her magic power and mental power at the same time to start a breakthrough. When Hela completed the breakthrough and opened her eyes again, she was the only one left at the core of the ritual. She turned around and saw Roland sitting on the mud to rest, a ring of undead she created, and a grey crow lying on the head of the undead. Success! Roland yawned and asked Hela casually. Yet. Hela nodded and walked slowly to Roland's side, and the grey crow crawling on the head of the undead beside her also flapped its wings and landed on Hela's shoulder. Hela stretched out her right finger, and the grey crow also obediently landed on her finger. What's its name? People used to call them death birds. You can use this name. Of course, you can give it a new name yourself. Roland said. Hela looked at the death bird on her finger, which was looking at her with its head tilted. She stretched out her left hand and gently stroked its head. The death bird also lowered its head obediently and let Hela do it. Deathbird doesn't sound good. Change your name. Since you are all grey, how about Grey Crow? The deathbird raised its head. It had just been born and had no idea about names, so it nodded indifferently. Since we have been promoted, let's go back. As Hela stroked the feathers of the Grey Crow, Roland also took out the space transmission scroll from the space ring, then waved at Hela and said, "Come closer." Yes. Hela nodded, and the Grey Crow also flapped its wings and landed on Hela's shoulder, then she walked to Roland's side. Roland grabbed Hela's other shoulder, then activated the spell scroll in his hand. As the surrounding elements were absorbed by the spell scroll, the spell model drawn on it immediately started to work, and a space wave swept over the position where Roland and Hela were, and the two disappeared directly on the spot. As the two left, only the destroyed ceremony was left in the center of the island of the dead, which had been purified by the dark elements. In a room in a hotel in Port City, a space anchor placed in the center of the room glowed slightly, and then the space wave swept past and Roland and Hela appeared above the anchor. After returning to Port City, Roland did not immediately go to the Adventurers Association and the Spellcaster Association to collect the commission reward, but rested in the hotel for a day. The environment of the Island of the Dead is quite bad. Since the water source of the Island of the Dead has been infected, Roland and Hela did not take a bath after landing on the island. Although he could use spells to sweep away the dust on the surface of his body to keep it clean, Roland chose to take a hot bath first. In addition, due to the arrangement of a large-scale ceremony, Roland, who had been working continuously with high intensity, was also a little tired. After returning to the hotel, he relaxed and fell asleep for more than 30 hours, and slept until noon on the third day. When Roland opened his eyes, he was awakened by hunger. In the warm bed, Roland sat up slowly. Hela, who was studying in the room, immediately noticed Roland's action, ran to the bed with a lunch that was kept warm by magic, and handed it to Roland. Roland took the lunch and ate it, while asking with some confusion, "Hela, how long have I slept?" Hela tilted her head, thought for a moment, and then said, 38 hours. I slept all day, no wonder I'm so hungry. Roland frowned and said, "It seems that I have to pay attention in the future. This world is not safe. It is not good to sleep for so long, in case something unexpected happens. There are still 2 days left for the room. It expires early the day after tomorrow." While watching Roland eating, Hela also reminded him. 2 days is enough. Roland said while eating lunch. "Go get the commission reward in the afternoon, prepare supplies tomorrow, and we'll leave early the day after tomorrow." "Where to go next?" Hela blinked and asked in a low voice. "The Kors Mountains." Roland wiped his mouth with a towel and responded slowly. "After studying theory for so long, you should try it out. The extraordinary creatures there are your best opponents. Moreover, the Kess Mountains are rich in resources. Before we are promoted to the 4th ring and open the channels of the Spellcaster Association, it is a good place for us to obtain rare materials in large quantities. The promotion of the 4th ring is very important. We cannot be careless and must prepare in advance." "Oh." Hela nodded thoughtfully. Chapter 39. The front desk of the Spellcasters Association. Roland handed over his spellcaster badge and image stone and said, "The commission has been completed." The busy front desk took the caster's badge and the image stone. Without looking at what commission Roland received, he directly put away the image stone. At the same time, after confirming that the caster's badge was correct, Roland's commission was changed to review status. Then, he handed the spellcaster badge back to Roland and said numbly, "Your entrustment has been reviewed. The association commissioner will check it. If there are no special circumstances, the entrustment reward will be sent after 3 days." Roland nodded and turned around to leave without any intention of embarrassing him. There is a special currency system within the Spellcasters Association, namely, silver points. Many internal functions only accept this special currency, not ordinary gold coins. In the official exchange of the Spellcasters Association, silver points are exchanged for 10 gold coins. Of course, only silver points can be exchanged for gold coins, and gold coins cannot be exchanged for silver points. Therefore, in the private black market, a few silver points can be exchanged for at least 600 to 700 gold coins depending on market fluctuations. Moreover, there is a market but no price, so you may not necessarily be able to buy it if you want to. There are many ways to obtain silver points, but for the current Roland, being entrusted by the Spellcasters Association is the only way he can obtain points legally. If the review of the entrustment goes smoothly, Roland will be able to get 500 silver points in 3 days. This is not a small amount. At that time, he can use black market channels to exchange for some rare materials in advance. I hope the black market over the Kess Mountains will not disappoint him and be more bold when selling goods. Pulling Hela, Roland walked out of the Spellcasters Association. After the front desk changed Roland's commission to review status, on the high tower of the Spellcasters Association, a one-ring spellcaster who was leaning on a chair and crossing his legs also put down the paper in his hand. Tisk, why did I get a job just after my turn? I'm so unlucky. While he said helplessly, he also opened the communication micro-terminal on the table. Ah! The commission to purify the island of the dead was completed? It was completed by a wild mage, which is strange. He blinked, a little surprised. In fact, this commission was originally placed inside the Tower of Truth, but no one cared about it until it was transferred to the local Spellcasters Association. This commission is not particularly difficult, but it is not that simple. If it is handed over to an intermediate spellcaster of the 4th to 6th rings, it is estimated to take half a day and a day to complete. However, if it is given to a low-level spellcaster, even a spellcaster from the Tower of Truth school, not only will it consume a lot of materials, it will take several months to complete. Therefore, the reason why no one is willing to accept this commission is because of this. Although mid-level and high-level spellcasters can easily solve it, they don't look down on the reward of the commission. How can they want to get them out of the Tower of Truth with only 500 silver points? Although 500 silver points are very attractive to some low-level spellcasters, this kind of commission is too difficult for low-level spellcasters. If they fail, all their early investment will be wasted. Drift. He opened Roland's message and checked it with interest. Did you join with a letter of recommendation from the Moon Elf in the north? Could it be that he is the apprentice of the Archmage who lives in seclusion over the Moon Elf? Forget it. Where did he come from? It's none of my business. He directly passed the news in front of him to his superiors. This kind of review that requires on-site inspection is not something at his level. It should be left to the big shots above to decide. After uploading it with a relaxed expression, he lay down directly on the chair, picked up the paper he bought at a high price, and continued to think about it. And on the streets of Port City, after taking the reward left by Si Chi from the Adventurers Association. While it was still early, Roland took Hela to the material store again and exchanged most of the reward he had just received for materials. After purchasing, the two returned to the hotel. When entering the room, Roland glanced aside as if nothing had happened, and then closed the door. What's wrong? Hela saw Roland's little movements and asked curiously. Someone is watching us, but they are just ordinary people. Roland frowned and whispered. They are probably people sent here by the heirs of the nobles before. They are just guys who have no inheritance rights. Don't worry about it. Although he said this, Roland was still a little wary. Although these heirs of nobles are idle and are just apprentices, it is basically impossible for them to be the heirs of any noble family. However, as nobles, they still have a certain amount of capital. If they can scrape together the money, they can't help it. Money to hire a killer. Maybe there will be some wild mages who will come to hunt them down for free just to please them. Gee, it seems that when I go out of town the day after tomorrow, I won't be too safe, and I will have a free mobile wallet delivered to my door. Roland thought so. In the corner of the hotel, the young man who had just been glanced at by Roland swallowed his saliva and ran out of the hotel crawling on the ground. He ran into a tavern in a panic. Monkey, what are you doing? A young man grabbed him and shouted. His body trembled subconsciously, and he breathed a sigh of relief after seeing a familiar face. As soon as he came back to his senses, he found that his back was already soaked in sweat. He quickly grabbed his companion who was shouting loudly and whispered. Where's the boss? It's the same place, said his companion casually. After hearing his companion's answer, he nodded and quickly ran into the tavern. Standing in front of a door, he took a few deep breaths. After regaining his composure, he opened the door and walked in. In the room, a tall and strong man was leaning on the animal skin sofa, holding a small wine glass and drinking wine slowly. "Boss, something is wrong. The two people we are looking for this time seem to be extraordinary people." He walked into the room and said to the hunk on the sofa. "Why are you panicking? It's just two apprentices." The macho man calmly refilled himself a glass of wine and said nonchalantly. "Did I tell you not long ago? There is nothing to be afraid of two wild mages." Hearing the macho man's words, he swallowed and said uneasily. "But, boss, I was discovered while following them, and that male wild mage seems to be stronger than you." The macho man stopped his hand, looked up at him, and said with a frown. "Are you sure you read that correctly?" "I swear, I saw it right," he responded with a firm tone. "Fuck, those stupid guys won't cheat me, right? I'll go over and have a look tomorrow. You can go and rest first." The macho man drank the wine from the wine glass in his hand and said. "Clear." He nodded, turned, and left the room. Chapter 40. Hela opened the window, and bright sunlight shone in from the window. The grey crow on her shoulder also screamed excitedly in the sunshine. "Morning." Behind her, Roland climbed out of bed, yawned and said lazily. Hela turned around, with most of her body still bathed in the sunlight, and showed a small smile. "Good morning." Roland blinked his eyes, and when he shook his head and woke up a little, Hela had already returned to her normal appearance. "What's wrong?" She looked at Roland and asked doubtfully. "No, it's nothing." Roland shook his head, walked to the table and sat down, and replied casually. Hela blinked and walked to sit opposite Roland. Roland said while sorting out the messy materials and scrolls he left on the table last night. "What do you want to eat this morning?" "What do you want to eat?" Hela asked rhetorically. "Well, good question." Roland paused, continued to clean up, and added. "I don't know either. Let's go outside and take a look. Maybe there's something delicious." Hela nodded and silently packed up the books on the table. She put a bookmark that Roland made for her on the book she hadn't read last night, closed it, and sorted all the reference books around her. After both of them had packed up, Roland waved his hand and put everything into the space ring. Roland was worried about leaving his things here at the hotel. After all, there is no security here. Once Roland and Hela leave, who knows if someone will sneak in and cause trouble. Therefore, in addition to some worthless daily supplies, such as various books and extraordinary materials, Roland always carried them with him. "Let's go." After packing up his things, Roland walked out of the room, followed closely by Hela. When the two of them walked out of the room and walked to the lobby on the first floor, a figure caught Roland's eyes, and at the same time, a faint perception passed across her surface. Roland glanced at him slightly. A Wild One Ring Knight? In the empty hall, his presence stood out. Although he didn't know why he was here, Roland didn't care about this and took Hela directly to go out to find food. As for his perception just now, because he was relatively restrained and simply sensed his exposed aura, it was in line with the unspoken rules among extraordinary people. Roland did not want to pay attention to him until he showed obvious hostility. However, although Roland didn't want to talk to him, he came up to him from the other side. Seeing the approaching knight, Roland subconsciously protected Hela behind him, and a spell model quickly formed in his body. Seeing the two people in the picture slowly walking down the stairs, the macho man who planned to come over to check the situation in person couldn't help but cursed in his heart. "Damn it, I was really fooled." As someone who can prosper and even become famous in the underground world of Port City, in addition to his first-level strength, the most important thing is to be careful and never provoke any powerful transcendent. And he was able to do this because he was willing to spend money and bought a book on the use of mental power from a wild mage on the black market. After studying it, he was able to roughly perceive the strength of other extraordinary beings. As soon as Roland and Hela came down, he took a careful look at them. Roland and Hela's exposed strength immediately suppressed him. What pure, huge magic power! With such pure magic power, how could the two of them be ordinary wild mages? He swallowed. He was considered a well-informed person. Even if he didn't mention the amazing purity, based on their exposed power, they might be second-level spellcasters. Especially the man walking in front might be a third-ring spellcaster. A spellcaster of this level, even a wild mage, is not something that a wild first ring knight like him can provoke. Damn it, those stupid bitches, do you call these two ordinary apprentices with no abilities? He nervously wiped the cold sweat from his face, held a box in his right hand, gritted his teeth and walked up. Is something wrong? Roland looked at the strong man sweating in front of him and said defensively. The strong man in front of him forced a smile and said in a low voice. Dear spellcaster, I am here to apologize to you. Oh. Roland raised his eyebrows slightly, looked him up and down, and said. Apologies for what? The strong man handed the box in his hand to Roland and whispered. Your Excellency, I was deceived by others and sent someone to follow you yesterday. This is a little thought, please accept it. That person yesterday turned out to be your subordinate. Roland glanced at the box. After seeing through the condition of the box and confirming that there was no danger, he stretched out his hand to catch it and said slowly. Were those useless heirs entrusting you? The strong man nodded awkwardly. I just accepted the things. I will leave early tomorrow morning and tell them that if you want to kill me, come quickly. I don't have time to play boring games with them. I would like to remind you, if you don't want to die, don't do it again. Splendid. Roland received the box into the space ring, and after saying these last words, he pulled Hela and left the hotel. Looking at Roland leaving, the sturdy man also breathed a sigh of relief. After glancing at the hall and confirming that no one heard their conversation, he hurriedly left the hotel. Bang, bastard, you dare to look down on us. In the luxurious room, a noble heir who received the news slapped the table hard and shouted loudly. We must teach them a lesson. Beside him, another noble heir said with a dark face. Do we really want to do this? What if the family finds out? In the corner of the room, a noble heir said cautiously. What are you afraid of? The worst case scenario is confinement for a few days. Yes, this is no longer an ordinary wild mage. We must fight hard. Then do it. The atmosphere in the room gradually became fanatical. Finally, the noble who said he would fight hard at the beginning slapped the table and shouted. Let's do it. Humph, we have invited 3 second ring spellcasters and 2 wild mages, cricket. What can they use to fight me? We will definitely catch them all. Those who are willing to work with us raise their hands. If not, leave. The others looked at each other and raised their hands one after another. Although not everyone wanted to do this, they followed the crowd in making a choice when one person raised his hand. No one chose to leave. Although the consequences of leaving were not mentioned, everyone present knew that once they left, it meant leaving this noble circle that huddled together for warmth. They could not afford the price. Chapter 41. On a new day, not long after dawn, Roland and Hela got on the carriage they had bought in the north, left the hotel openly, and walked out of the port city. After the carriage left the hotel, the people waiting at the door of the hotel immediately ran in one direction. Then, less than an hour later, Roland in the carriage noticed that some people were following him. Roland glanced at the calm Hela, and used his mental power to search and confirm the number and strength of the people who were tracking. 3 second ring spellcasters and 5 first ring spellcasters. They all seemed to be wild mages. Roland sensed the quality of magic in their bodies and was a little confused. These few people dared to stop me? It seems that I still overestimated those noble descendants. If I had known, I would not have worked overtime to make spell scrolls yesterday. Roland yawned and leaned back slowly on his seat. Since there are no powerful enemies, let Hela deal with them. Soon, the carriage carrying Roland and Hela left the port city and ran west along the official road. After driving along the official road for more than half an hour, the carriage also drove to an empty space with no one. Finally, the spellcasters who had been tracking them took action. With several obvious fluctuations of magic power, 3 huge fireballs blasted at the horses pulling the carriage. However, just as the fireballs approached the carriage, Roland raised his head, and weak magic power popped out from his fingers and shot into the 3 fireballs. The magic power shot into the simple spell model of the fireball, quickly destroying its internal model structure. Then, the 3 fireballs shrank rapidly and finally disappeared completely. Hela, go and try to fight with other spellcasters. After cracking the 3 fireballs, Roland leaned back in his seat and said calmly. Yet. Hela nodded, stood up with the elf staff, and walked out of the carriage. When she walked out of the carriage, the spellcasters hidden in the surrounding woods also came out. 8 wild spellcasters appeared. On Hela's shoulder, the grey crow tilted its head, flapped its wings slightly backward, and its whole body disappeared after it became ethereal. Seeing Hela getting off the carriage, the hostile spellcasters did not show any mercy and quickly cast spells to attack. First level spell Mental Interference. Looking at the people casting spells, Hela did not hesitate and took the lead in attacking. As the mental interference swept around, the minds of several spellcasters who were concentrating on casting spells to build spell models froze slightly, and the spell models that had not yet been formed collapsed directly. The second level spellcasters were fine, with strong mental power, and Hela was a first level spell for everyone, so they directly resisted the mental interference and continued to cast spells. The first level spellcasters did not have such strong mental resistance. Except for one spellcaster who cancelled the spell in time to avoid the backlash of the spell, the other four were not spared, and their mental power was damaged by the backlash of the spell. Without hesitation, Hela took the lead in attacking the 5 first ring spellcasters, and several black arrows containing thick dark elements shot at the 4 people. Several spellcasters who were attacked by the backlash of the spell endured the mental discomfort and tried to dodge Hela's attack. Except for the spellcasters who were not attacked by the backlash and dodged all the attacks, the others failed to dodge effectively due to mental discomfort. Although they all barely dodged the first attack, the second attack hidden in the follow-up successfully hit them. One spellcaster who was unlucky and had his heart pierced directly died on the spot. The rest of the people who were luckier only had scratches, and the unlucky ones had a black infected area on their bodies. They gritted their teeth and retreated after their bodies were eroded by the dark elements, mobilizing the magic power in their bodies to try to expel the dark elements. Before the only first ring spellcaster in good condition could congratulate himself for removing the spell model in time and blocking Hela's combo, a phantom appeared behind him. The rematerialized grey crow opened its mouth, and a sharp stone particle composed of dark elements shot out from its mouth and pierced his head directly. 2 of the 5 first ring spellcasters died and 3 were injured. While Hela was dealing with the first ring spellcasters, the other 3 second ring spellcasters present finally completed their spells. A fireball 3 times larger than before, a sharp ice spike, and a cyan gust of wind rushed towards Hela. Facing these 3 second ring spells, Hela remained calm. First ring spell Transfiguration. Hela stretched out her left hand, slightly hooked her palm upward, and a thin layer of earth wall was pulled up directly from the ground by her, cleverly blocking the fireball. Bang! When the fireball touched the earth wall, it exploded instantly, blasting the entire earth wall into broken mud. At the same time, relying on the physical fitness equivalent to that of a first ring knight, Hela decisively rolled to the side twice to avoid the ice spike. The ice spikes pierced the place where Hela had just stood, and froze the surrounding half-meter area. As for the strong wind that followed her, Hela stretched out her left hand and threw the undead corpse tied to the carriage and covered with cloth. At the same time, a soul crystal flew out of Hela's pocket and threw it into the undead corpse. The newly revived undead was swept into the strong wind as soon as it opened its eyes. Fortunately, every part of its body was selected and strengthened by Hela piece by piece, and a second ring spell would not kill it. It held the bone sword tightly and inserted it into the ground, bearing the attack of the strong wind. Although her body was a little dirty with some dirt on it, Hela was not spoiled. She did not show any pretentiousness and cast a spell to fight back. First level spell Flesh Rot. 3 dark rays of light shot out from the staff and hit the 3 second level spellcasters. A second level spellcaster threw out a first level spell and intercepted Hela's attack. The other 2 looked at the first level spell shot at them with contempt, and had no intention of dodging or intercepting. Then, in their surprised eyes, 2 dark rays of light passed through their elemental shields and hit them directly. Puff! A second level spellcaster vomited blood directly under this attack, and the flesh on his chest quickly rotted where he was attacked. In the severe pain, he forced himself to cancel the spell in time. The other spellcaster was not so miserable. His ordinary-looking clothes flashed slightly, and he barely resisted the attack. However, as a price, a small hole was corroded on his clothes. Looking at the clothes with a hole on his body, his face darkened instantly. Damn, my robe, I lost this time. He clenched the magic ball in his hand and had the idea of retreating. He didn't forget that there was a stronger person in the car. Thinking of this, he reached into his pocket and held the spell scroll inside. Chapter 42. Hela stretched out her hand and used a first-level spell of the plasticity system to once again detonate the incoming second-level spell. Then, she took a step back, and countless elements were mobilized by her. Elements that were almost visible to the naked eye were floating around her. Seeing Hela being so bold, the 2 second-level spellcasters standing in front of her also became alert and immediately cast spells to add various protections to themselves. And just as they looked at Hela warily, behind the second-level spellcaster whose chest was corroded, the grey crow that had disappeared for a while materialized silently behind him. Through the ability of virtualization, it passed through all his defenses. The grey crow opened its mouth, and the dark elements began to gather quietly. Under the cover of Hela, its small movements were not discovered. Bang! After completing the energy storage, a jet black beam of light shot out of Grey Crow's mouth, directly blasting his head. After Grey Crow took action, another second-level spellcaster naturally noticed the situation here immediately. After Hela succeeded, she calmly loosened her control on the surrounding elements as if nothing had happened. If you are building a spell model, mobilizing so many elements will naturally consume a lot of money, but if you are just cheating, then there will not be much consumption. It is almost the consumption of a 1-level spell. However, this kind of thing can only be deceived by wild extraordinary people who have not received complete extraordinary education. The last second-level spellcaster looked at the corpse that had just fallen not far away, and he also had the intention of retreating in his heart. Before Hela seemed to pay attention to him, he turned around decisively and tried to run away. However, just as he turned his head, a bone sword was cut off from his head and hit the elemental shield around him. After finishing a second-level spell, the first-level undead sneaked up behind him unknowingly. Go away! The second-level caster cursed and threw a first-level fireball in an attempt to knock away the first-level undead. However, a level 1 spell basically doesn't do much damage to it. I saw it holding the fireball hard, without even taking a step back, and then slashed with the sword. Bang! The second-level caster's shield splashed with ripples. Before he could continue to cast the spell, a powerful magic burst out behind him. In the peripheral vision when he turned his head, a dark black light almost covered his back. Zi bang! Under the attack of this second-level spell, his elemental shield was completely shattered within a few strokes. Then, under the combined blow of the light and the bone sword, he died, and his body was broken into countless pieces. After seeing the last enemy lose signs of life, Hela also dusted herself off, and the battle was over. The 3 first-level spellcasters who were injured by Hela were all assassinated and killed by Grey Crow. The Grey Crow slowly landed on Hela's shoulder, while the ring of undead consciously walked to the carriage, tied himself up, and pulled the cloth. Thanks for your hard work. Hela patted the undead's head and whispered. The soul fire of the undead flashed, and then compressed into a soul crystal and fell into Hela's hand. Hela put the soul crystal back into her pocket and entered the car again. Roland lay on his seat and glanced at her. Hela sat at the table and looked at Roland quietly. Well done. Roland smiled and said with praise. Then, he changed the subject and said. But have you forgotten something? Hela was stunned, lowering her head and thinking silently. After thinking for a while, she raised her head and looked at Roland with doubts in her eyes. Roland shook his head helplessly and snapped his fingers with his right hand, clearing the second-level spell covering Hela's body. As the spell was lifted, Hela quickly realized something was wrong. Aren't there 3 second-level spellcasters? How come she only killed 2, and there was 1 more? Hela recalled the battle just now. The spellcaster who relied on his robe to withstand an attack seemed to sneak away. The action was obviously not very secretive, so why didn't she notice it? Hela frowned and recalled more details. When he left, a second-level spell was suddenly released from the right pocket of his robe. After this spell was released, she had been ignoring his existence. Is this what it turned out to be like? A magic control spell? Hela stood up and said. I'm going to kill him right now. He has run away a long time ago. There is no need. Just sit down. Roland waved his hand downwards and said casually. He wasn't worried about what would happen to those who escaped. For those descendants of nobles who were not taken seriously, it was basically impossible to hire more powerful extraordinary beings to hunt them down. As for the escaped second-level spellcaster, Roland didn't think he would come back to seek death. Roland is still very confident in himself. Since he is not as strong as Roland now, then he will never catch up with Roland in this life. Roland, who has mastered countless extraordinary knowledge, has this kind of confidence. Hela puffed up her face and sat back down somewhat unhappy. This was the first person to leave her alive after she embarked on the extraordinary path. She opened the books on the table and couldn't stand them for some reason. After turning 2 pages under pressure, she raised her head and looked at Roland and whispered. I want to learn second-level spells, as well as magic and control spells. Roland smiled slightly. Okay, but I won't be able to teach you until the Kess Mountains are settled. All right. Hela puffed her face, nodded, and said with some reluctance. On the side, the grey crow stopped on a wooden stick hanging above, slowly combing its feathers with its beak. Although Hela took advantage of the opportunity to establish a connection with Grey Crow and was promoted to the second ring. However, Hela has only been promoted to the second level. Although her mental power and magic power have been improved, the knowledge in Hela's head will not be updated at the same time. She still only has the first level spells she masters, and she doesn't know any second level spells. Moreover, because the promotion speed was too fast, she had not yet finished the part of the learning plan planned by Roland for Hela. Therefore, Roland did not teach her the second level spell immediately, but asked her to continue learning according to the study plan. Mainly because Roland and Hela's residences are not fixed, and because they are currently relatively poor, the materials they can provide for Hela's training are limited, and there is no place for Hela to practice casually. Therefore, Hela's learning progress is relatively slow. However, Roland also has a target now, the Keeks Mountains. Roland planned to take Hela to settle there for a few years. He planned to use the resources of the mountains to accumulate wealth while teaching Hela and improving himself at the same time. Based on his experience in his previous life, Roland was well aware of all kinds of adventures and rare resources in the Kess Mountains. It would be a shame not to scan them thoroughly. Roland planned to stay until both he and Hela completed their first sublimation before leaving. Chapter 43. Hoo! Hey! The man gasped for air and ran recklessly in the dense forest. The sharp branches scratched his coat. The gorgeous and luxurious coat was not only stained with filth, but also scratched into tatters. Fresh blood was stained with the trousers on his lower body, falling to the ground drop by drop along the trousers, and the faint smell of blood spread around. While he was running away frantically, he also glanced behind and around him from time to time to confirm if anyone was still chasing him. Just when he turned around again, several people wearing black robes, hiding their whole bodies, were running towards him quickly. Damn it, still chasing me! The man cursed secretly, turned around and sped away for his life. Compared to the man's panic, the men in black robes who were chasing him behind him seemed to be doing it with ease, keeping a distance and hanging behind the man. After you chased me for more than 10 minutes, the man's physical strength and magic power were consumed more and more, and his speed slowed down uncontrollably. Just when he glanced at the man in black robe who was getting closer and closer behind him, he showed a panicked face, turned around and jumped out of the bushes to the official road. He saw an uncontrolled carriage moving slowly along the official road. When he saw this carriage, the man's eyes immediately lit up. With such good luck, I can just meet the spellcaster here. However, after scanning the carriage and not seeing any badge marks, his eyes darkened again. There is no badge mark, so he is probably just a wild mage somewhere. The wild mage can't deter those guys behind. Bad luck! The man cursed secretly, quickly caught up with and passed the carriage, and ran towards the west with all his strength. As he continued to run for his life, the men in black robes who were chasing him emerged from the bushes. After seeing the carriage, a group of people stopped. The leading man in black robe glanced at the carriage, and then waved and made a few gestures. The group started moving again. Most of the men in black robes continued to catch up with the fleeing men in front, while a few threw themselves into the carriage. Roll! As they rushed over, a calm voice came from the carriage, and then, a ring of resistance exploded from the carriage, knocking away all the men in black robes who rushed towards them. Unprepared for the mistake, the men in black robes were knocked into the trees and grass on the roadside one by one. This incident instantly attracted everyone's attention. The leader of the men in black robes frowned, and with a wave of his right hand, the group of people turned around and headed towards the carriage. When they came to kill them, a young man walked out of the carriage holding an elf staff. He calmly stared at the flying knife thrown by the man in black robe. Second level spell gravity. Under the influence of the force field, the flying knives, including the man in black robe who rushed towards him, were all smashed down from mid-air. However, except for a few black-robed men who directly smashed into the ground, the other black-robed men were basically able to maintain their balance. At most, some of them were in a state of embarrassment. The young man did not hesitate and continued to cast the spell. Second level spell Curse of the Undead. He raised the elf staff and called out the names of the men in black robes around him. He killed more than a dozen first-level men in black robes with one blow. Court death. A black-robed man of the second ring knight saw that all his subordinates around him were losing signs of life. He couldn't hold back the anger in his heart and rushed towards the young man with a roar. The young man didn't even look at him, and calmly killed 7 more men in black robes. When he was almost in front of the young man finally looked at him. The two looked at each other. Second level spell mental shock. The moment the two looked at each other, the young man's eyes flashed with light, and a powerful mental impact instantly rushed into the mind of the second ring knight. Buzz! As if his head had been hit by a sledgehammer, the second ring knight stopped in confusion. Then, 2 almost instantaneous second-level spells were thrown out by the young man. The dark black arrow first hit the knight's neck, corroding and penetrating his armor. Then, the sharp light green arrow passed through the gap was poured into his body. The violent burst of wind instantly destroyed his neck and jaw. While the young man killed him, all the other men in black robes also rushed up. Among them, a second ring knight who approached quietly had arrived behind him. Without any fear, he turned around and used his staff to block the attack of the knight behind him. Then, a spell model appeared on the knight's chest. Second level spell Death Grip Youth Edition. The young man put his free left hand into the magic circle, grasped the knight's heart, and squeezed it to burst. Then, he raised his leg and kicked it away. During this time, all the other men in black robes also came to him. Second level spell Ring of Resistance. The young man cast the spell again without changing his expression. With him as the center, a repulsive force burst out in all directions, and 8 men in black robes were instantly knocked away. However, 13 men in black robes still resisted. The young man raised his eyebrows slightly, and in his free left hand, a spell scroll appeared out of thin air. Subsequently, this spell scroll was activated. Second level spell scroll Ring of Resistance. The 2 superimposed rings of resistance instantly knocked 9 more people away, while the remaining 3 stuck their swords on the ground and retreated uncontrollably. Only one person walked up step by step carrying the superimposed spells. The boy ignored the black-robed man and continued to cast spells calmly. After spending more than 10 seconds casting spells, a round of silver-white curved blades appeared in front of the boy. Second ring spell Space Rift Blade. The moment the silver-white curved blade appeared, it immediately attacked the enemy in front of the boy. As one of the few space-based spells that can be cast at a low level, the single target killing power of the Space Rift Blade is not even weaker than the 5th ring and 6th ring shaping spells. However, although the single target damage is explosive, the shortcomings are also very obvious. The difficulty of casting is high, the pre-swing is long, the magic consumption is large, the attack range is short, and the duration is only a few seconds. It is precisely because of this that the boy will let the black-robed man approach, and at the same time, use the resistance ring to select the target worthy of killing with this spell. As the silver-white curved blade passed by and dissipated after 3 seconds, the boy lifted the resistance ring, and the 4 people in front of him all paused. Then, 4 heads flew up together. The boy ignored the 4 dead bodies in front of him and looked at the remaining black-robed men calmly. After the strongest few of the black-robed men died, the morale of the remaining black-robed men collapsed. A few rushed towards the boy like crazy, while the rest turned around and ran for their lives. In response, the boy just cast a spell calmly, harvesting these lives that had lost their minds. Chapter 44. As a black light covered the last escaping man in black robe, his body shook slightly, quickly lost signs of life, and fell to the ground. The boy, or rather Roland, calmly put down the elf staff. Then, he reached out and put down the undead body tied to the car. At the same time, the matching soul crystal was also thrown out of the car by Hela. It fell on the undead corpse, and then it revived. As soon as the first ring of undead woke up, it quickly picked up the bone sword and looked around cautiously. Then, after seeing the corpses on the ground, it scratched its head in confusion. Has it started yet? Why does it seem to be over? Just when he hesitated, Hela's order came to its mind. After receiving the order, it silently put away the bone sword, slowly walked towards the nearby corpses, and moved them all together. At this time, the man who was being chased also turned around and walked over again. He saluted Roland politely and said respectfully, "Dear spellcaster, thank you for your help." Roland returned the greeting slightly and said calmly, "It's just that they are too arrogant." If these men in black robes hadn't committed suicide to attack Roland, Roland wouldn't have bothered to care about this kind of pursuit. After all, whether they live or die has nothing to do with Roland. No matter what, I thank you for your help. This is my little thank you gift. The man said respectfully, and at the same time, he presented his thank you gift with both hands. Roland glanced at a point card with 100 silver points stored in it. It's delivered to your door for free, so don't give it up for free. Roland nodded slightly and decisively accepted his thank you gift. Then, Roland looked him up and down and cast a second-level healing spell to speed up the healing of his wounds. The man was slightly surprised. After noticing that his body was recovering quickly, he saluted Roland respectfully and said, I still have a mission, so I'll leave first. Thank you for your generosity. Roland nodded slightly. After Roland nodded, the man turned around and quickly left along the official road. After he disappeared from Roland's sight, the diligent undead on the side also moved all the corpses to one place, and under the command of Hela, they pulled out all the valuable equipment and supplies on them. Compared with the previous batch of wild mages hired by the descendants of nobles, the worth of these men in black robes is obviously much higher. The previous batch of wild mages were basically poor people. Even if they reached the level of second-level spellcasters, they were still poor people. He didn't have any good equipment on him, and the only things worth taking away were the ordinary staffs of 2 second-level spellcasters. Wild mages are like this. Although they make money faster than other extraordinary people, they also spend more money. They basically use the money on themselves, buying all kinds of extraordinary knowledge and all kinds of extraordinary materials, so as to continue to learn and experiment, looking for a way to advance. Therefore, wild mages can be considered a relatively wealthy group if they don't have to take on loans. Therefore, after Roland knew that the noble heir hired a wild mage to intercept and kill him, he didn't bother to take action himself. However, the men in black robes in front of them were much better. They were probably knights raised by some noble family. They all wore a set of armor, and they also had a set of black robes that concealed their aura. Although the quality is not very high, there are only 5 sets of 1-ring enchanted armor, and the rest are ordinary armors, but with the addition of the black robe that conceals the aura, it can be considered a big windfall. After the undead brought all the armors to him, Roland took a look at the markings on the armors and put them all away without caring. It's just a small family that I don't know, even if it's a big family, it doesn't matter. When the time comes, they will be thrown into the black market over the Kess Mountains. Roland still doesn't believe that someone will go to war for these pieces of equipment in the black market. After finally putting away the black robe, Roland threw a fireball, burning all the naked bodies of the black robe into ashes. Finally, a ring of undead was tied back to the carriage, and the carriage started again, slowly walking away into the distance. Silver Ash City. Within the Silver Empire, there was a city with little reputation. It is not as politically famous as the territory of the Silver family, the capital of powerful princes, nor is it an important trading city like the Port City, Trading Port, and Northern City, nor does it have a special status like a free city. It is just an ordinary city with countless mediocre developments in the Silver Empire. At most, it is because it is close to the Port City, prices are lower, and development is slightly better. As Roland planned to pass through this city on his way to the Kess Mountains, Roland and Hela naturally chose to rest for a few days when passing by this city. It's very tiring to travel every day. Even if the two of them were riding in a carriage, they would still be very tired without having to do anything. Roland and Hela were sitting on the second floor of the hotel, enjoying the cool and comfortable evening breeze while casually enjoying the special delicacies of this area. Compared to the bustling and a bit irritating Port City, Silver Grey City is relatively quiet, and even the pubs are much quieter. Although there are a lot of drunkards on the first floor, there are still many fewer drunkards than in Port City. As for the second floor, there are not many people, so the seats are relatively far away. Therefore, although other people on the second floor were talking, it did not affect Roland's good mood. This is called life. Roland blew the evening breeze and slowly poured warm wine into his and Hela's wine glasses with his right hand. After putting the wine aside to warm it, Roland drank the warm wine with a comfortable look on his face. Although in his previous life, Roland preferred to drink juice or carbonated drinks rather than alcohol. However, Roland did not hate alcohol. His attitude was neutral. He could drink it, but he would not take the initiative to drink it. In this relatively backward world, Roland, who did not have much money, had no choice. Roland had no channels to buy luxury goods that only nobles and middle and high-level spellcasters could afford. Of course, even if he had channels, Roland would not waste money to buy it when he had little money. Therefore, Roland, who did not want to drink boiled water all the time, could only drink alcohol. At least, the alcohol had some taste. If you were tired of drinking boiled water, it would be nice to drink a little alcohol. Roland had no restrictions on Hella's drinking. Anyway, Roland and Hella were both extraordinary people. For them, ordinary alcohol was almost the same as boiled water with taste, and had no effect at all. Moreover, in the north, drinking alcohol to warm up is a normal thing. Those who don't drink alcohol are outliers, even children. The most important point is that even if Roland and Hella drink alcohol like water every day, they will never get drunk unless they add drugs specifically for extraordinary people. Chapter 45. On the hills outside this small city, Roland and Hella were wandering aimlessly. In this world without computers and the internet, Roland could only pass the time by wandering around. He didn't have any purpose for coming out this time, he just didn't want to stay in the room all the time. He was busy drawing spell scrolls, making alchemical potions and training Hella every day. Except that training Hella in the latter was a bit interesting. For Roland, the previous work was no different from working on the assembly line. It's boring, repetitive, and requires a lot of concentration. Roland could still keep working when he had no sense of security, but now, there were several large boxes of spell scrolls and alchemy potions piled up in his space ring. Fighting, defense, recovery, summoning, escape, a lot of various types of things are prepared. Looking at what he had prepared, Roland's sense of security was satisfied, so he relaxed. It just so happened that he was passing through a city and had a temporary residence. Roland just wanted to go out and walk around alone, empty his mind and not think about anything. As for Hella, Roland did not invite her, she followed him on her own. Standing on the hill, Roland closed his eyes and opened his hands in front of him. The strong evening wind rushed from his front, causing his hair to scatter. What should I do when I come into this world? Roland closed his eyes and thought silently. With no safety worries, Roland, who was free, also began to think about the meaning of his coming to this world. Although he now seems to have a clear plan to improve his strength, this is just a professional habit. Roland was a little confused about his real plans for the future. He is not a plot party, but has joined the party on behalf of others. Although he has experienced dozens of game version changes in his previous life, and has also been highly involved in some main missions that have changed the world situation, but for those main missions, the changes of the times, or the legend of heroes, etc. He actually didn't feel anything, didn't catch a cold, and didn't have any regrets. Therefore, like the protagonists in some of the novels about traveling through the game world that he read in his previous life, he did not have any plot that he particularly wanted to reverse, or an NPC that he particularly wanted to save. Roland opened his eyes and looked into the distance silently. Forget it, I don't want to die if I don't have a goal anyway. If I don't have one, I won't have one. I can just find the goal of life slowly in the future. Thinking of this, Roland glanced at Hella beside him. Speaking of which, Hella is also one of the NPCs that players find difficult to deal with. The reason is not difficult to guess, that is, whether Hella is in the opening CG or becomes the undead boss, her appearance is quite good, which is in line with many people's XP. As for Hella's backstory, who cares how many people the undead under his command have killed, as long as they look good, that's all. Of course, Roland is not included. If Roland met Hella who came out from the undead subplane and started killing everywhere, the most Roland would do is lament her miserable experience. Then, if Roland could kill her at that time, he would definitely not mind killing her. However, now that Hella has been rescued by him, there is a high probability that Hella will not become that cold and heartless lich. For those NPCs and plots with unfavorable endings, he could only say that he respected the so-called hard feelings that were spread by word of mouth in player forums. Especially some of the more special beings, the condemned princess who fell into darkness, the female king who relied on her strength to act recklessly, the leader of the peasant uprising army, the dictator who oppressed the entire people. After being sacrificed to the subplane of the undead, they returned to the living world to take revenge. The Lich of the World, also known as Hela. Regarding their deaths, Roland only felt that there was nothing wrong with them. Some of them did have tragic pasts, but Roland could only accept their revenge on their enemies. Even if they extended their revenge and killed other people's entire families, Roland was fine with it. But it would be too much to directly become antisocial and engage in indiscriminate mass murder everywhere. Therefore, Roland didn't feel it was a pity that they were killed or imprisoned. They had a reason for the massacre. If they killed the whole family for no reason, it wouldn't be a problem for the whole village and the whole clan to unite to resist them. Hey? Why are you looking at me like this? Hela stood aside, met Roland's strange eyes, and said in confusion. Then, she lowered her head and looked at her clothes. Since she was out strolling around, Hela wore a set of ordinary clothes. She opened her hands slightly, twisted her body uneasily, tugged on her clothes with her right hand, and said hesitantly. Is it weird? Or is it a bit ugly? Roland came back to his senses, looked at the uneasy Hela in front of him, compared it with the indifferent Hela in his mind when he grew up, shook his head gently, and spoke to comfort him. No, it suits you very well. Then why? Hela was a little confused. I'm just thinking about something, it's nothing. Roland didn't want to tell her that he was thinking about how to kill a lich, her future self. Hela blinked and saw that Roland had no intention of explaining, nor did she ask any further questions. She just stood aside quietly. After blowing the cool evening breeze for a while, Roland's somewhat impetuous mood gradually calmed down. Although I can't think of any direction in life, it is always a good thing to improve my strength according to the previous plan. No matter what the future holds, in this world destined to chaos and war, only with enough strength can he be qualified to think about the future. It's getting dark, let's go back. Roland turned around and said with a chuckle. Hela nodded. Well, let me test how well you have studied recently. Roland smiled and approached Hela maliciously. What are you doing? Looking at Roland approaching, Hela said hesitantly. Ahoy! Roland chuckled, grabbed Hela's right hand, and took her to jump directly from the top of the hill. Hey! Hey! In the unprepared sneak attack, Hela was stunned for a moment and couldn't react for a while. A first-level spell, light body spell. As Roland cast the spell, his body became lighter and his falling speed slowed down. However, because Roland was still holding Hela, they were still falling rapidly. Still dumbfounded? Roland said with a relaxed look. After hearing Roland's reminder, Hela finally reacted and cast the spell in a panic. After failing twice, Hela barely finished casting the spell. Under the influence of the light body technique, the two of them fell slowly and smoothly from the sky to the ground like fallen leaves. After touching the ground, Roland let go of Hela's hand and said. It seems like you need to train your ability to deal with emergencies. Hela lowered her head and whispered. I know, I will practice hard. Don't be so frustrated. It's normal not to react at first. Just practice slowly in the future. Go back. The city gate is about to close. Chapter 46. It's finally almost here. Roland opened the window and looked at the outline of the Kess Mountains that could be seen in the distance, and said a little tiredly. More than a month has passed since Roland rested in Silver Ash City and thought about his future. During this more than a month, although Roland and Hela occasionally encountered towns and took a rest in the towns, more than a month of boring travel still made Roland a little tired. Just when Roland yawned, he suddenly turned his head and looked in one direction, frowning and opening his mind. In that direction, he noticed a spiritual force spreading out in all directions. After opening his mental power, he saw the pursuit between two adventure teams not far away. The ones who escaped were a team of only 7 people, while the adventure team chasing them numbered more than 30 people. Tisk, here we go again. Roland curled his lips and directed the horse pulling the carriage to turn around to avoid the group of people running in this direction. Since the last time he encountered a similar pursuit and the result was affected, Roland has always chosen to take a detour when encountering similar situations. Although killing people and seizing treasures can make money quickly, it is not good if you do too much of this kind of thing, and you will easily be targeted by the nobles of the Silver Empire. It's okay to provoke 1 or 2 nobles, but if you provoke too many, it may happen that the younger ones come, and the older ones come, and the older ones come, and then the older ones come. Roland was also worried that he would overturn because of this, so he chose to give in and ignore it. While Roland's carriage was turning around, Roland's spirit saw that the fleeing adventurer team also quickly changed direction and ran towards Roland. Roland raised his eyebrows slightly and directed the carriage to change direction. After changing direction, the fleeing adventurer team also changed direction. You're staring at me. This is it. Roland thought for a moment and cast a spell on the carriage. First level spell Perception Shielding. Second level spell Invisible Mist. With the effect of the 2 spells, the entire carriage, including the 2 horses, became invisible. Then, Under Roland's gaze, the fleeing adventurer team became a little panicked, but they quickly recovered and fled in another direction. Seeing this situation, Roland also stopped using the spell to block the prophecy. After readjusting the road to the Kess Mountains, Roland closed the window and leaned back slowly. And just when Roland thought he would no longer get involved in such nonsense. Not long after the carriage resumed walking, his ears moved and he heard the sound of running and cursing getting closer and closer. "You bitch, you are provoking the Iron Shield Corps to give our things back. Haha, you said it's yours, so it's yours? The name of your Iron Shield Corps isn't written on it either. You bitch, you sneak attacked my brothers and stole the Legion's things. I'm going to kill you, kill you." As the male voice fell, a surge of power erupted. Bang! Roland was speechless listening to the noise outside. No, how could we still encounter this? Without any hesitation, Roland made the carriage move in the opposite direction. However, just when Roland asked the carriage to move, several figures were blasted from the distance, turned into an arc, and hit the carriage. Tisk! Roland stretched out his hand and used his mental power to subtly affect their trajectory, causing them to fall faster and hit the front of the carriage. After hitting the ground, they quickly got up one by one and threw a package in Roland's direction. At the same time, a dozen adventurers filed out from behind and quickly surrounded them. The moment the package was thrown out, Roland immediately intercepted it. In full view of everyone, the mid-flying package suddenly fell directly to the ground. "Quick, grab the package back." Although the adventurer who ran out from behind didn't know what was going on, he still pointed at the package on the ground and shouted repeatedly. A dozen adventurers immediately started moving, and 10 of them surrounded the adventurers who had just climbed up, while the remaining adventurers rushed to the package, picked it up and opened it. Looking at the empty package, the adventurer who opened it shouted loudly. "You bastards, where's the stuff?" "Ha, guess what?" Among the few people surrounded, one wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said sarcastically. "You're looking for death." An adventurer surrounding them roared and slashed at them. Bang! An arrow from nowhere hit the knife, and he defended himself. A woman in red clothes fell from the air and jumped into the encirclement. She looked at the people around her with vigilance and whispered to the people next to her. "Have the things been sent out?" "Sent out? That's good." After replying, the corners of her mouth raised slightly. "Humph, you can't even protect your own brother, you loser." A strong man came out with a battle axe, looked at the women who were surrounded and yelled. After the man appeared, the women in the circle quickly put away their smiles. She looked at him coldly and sneered. "It sounds like you are protecting me." As she spoke, she waved the blood-stained dagger in a showy manner. "You're looking for death." The man roared angrily and struck with a single leap with his battle axe. She looked at him coldly, and while he was jumping in the air, she took out a spell scroll from her pocket and tore it open without hesitation. Then, a space wave passed through, and everyone in the surrounding circle disappeared. Bang! The man smashed several cracks into the ground of the encirclement with an axe. Looking at the empty ground, he snorted coldly and lifted the battle axe out of the ground. Then, he raised his head and looked in Roland's direction, aiming his battle axe at him. "Sneaky guy!" Gan! Roland was numb. In desperation, he had to cancel the spell effect and walked out of the carriage. Facing his ferocious momentum, Roland showed no fear, calmly met his gaze and spoke calmly. "I'm just passing by. I don't know and I don't want to get involved in your affairs." He looked Roland up and down, frowned, and said. "She just said that the things were delivered. Do you believe what the enemy says? Moreover, even if he is sent out, what does it have to do with me?" Roland retorted, and at the same time, he waved to the woods on the side. Second level spell Pyroblast, improved version. Bang! Roland directly blasted a big crater into the trees nearby. "I don't have to lie to you," Roland said calmly. Looking at the big pit beside him, he hesitated. When he hesitated, Hela also poked her head out of the car behind. "That's it. I was the one who was offended." After seeing Hela, who also exuded the second ring level, the man decisively chose to give in. "In that case, please give way." "Good." The man quickly asked the adventurers to get out of the way and watched as Roland's carriage passed through them and headed towards the Kess Mountains. "Deputy Commander, what should we do next?" An adventurer came over and asked the man in a low voice. "Damn it, what else can you do? Keep looking." I don't believe they have a second spell scroll. Those guys must not have teleported far. In a team of 10, look for it quickly. If you find it, send a signal to me immediately. The man cursed and ordered the adventurers present. Chapter 47. Although Roland encountered some minor troubles on the way to the Kes Mountains, when he arrived at the outer town of the Kes Mountains, Tianyun City. Finally arriving at his destination, he put aside the minor troubles he encountered, and with the fresh breeze blowing, his mood improved a lot. After settling down in a random hotel, Roland was not in a hurry to plunge into the Kes Mountains, but chose to rest for a few days first. Of course, while resting, Roland also quietly collected intelligence. The Kes Mountains, as the largest source of extraordinary resources in the Sinner region, has been the source of extraordinary resources produced by the Kes Mountains, and adventurers and extraordinary people from all over the world have almost never stopped fighting. In addition to the interference of the 7 silver families, the attention of the high-level leaders of the Tower of Truth, and various foreign forces, dog-headed people, moon elves, and other forces all joined in the celebration here. The area around the Kes Mountains is quite chaotic. Even the several major cities controlled by the Silver family are not very safe. In addition to wandering around and eavesdropping, Roland also spent money to buy basic intelligence from the Adventurers Association and the Spellcasters Association. Sitting on the second floor of the tavern, Roland drank warm wine as if nothing had happened, while using magic to strengthen his hearing, listening to the noisy sounds in the tavern and extracting valuable information from it. Although there may not be a single useful sentence out of 10 of the adventurers drinking in the tavern, it's okay to be idle, just in case you overhear some valuable information. Based on the intelligence collected recently, Roland also roughly understood the recent situation of the Kes Mountains. In addition to the classic fighting and killing between adventurers and various conflicts caused by extraordinary resources, what attracted Roland the most was the existence of retired soldiers. With the end of the Rose War in the Sinner region, a large number of soldiers who had been tempered by war retired from the army. Although many soldiers were sealed to the border of the Empire through their military exploits and became the emerging nobles of the Silver Empire, relying on the same military career, they formed a new military noble group, the Border Nobles. However, only a few people can be promoted to nobles. Ordinary retired soldiers who are lucky enough can return home with some money from the spoils they looted on the battlefield. However, more retired soldiers still fell into poverty after retirement. In order to survive, they who only knew how to fight and kill also picked up their weapons again. Some of them became adventurers, formed militarized adventure groups, and came to the Kes Mountains to seek survival, while others chose to march eastward to the war-torn Donner. These adventure groups composed of retired soldiers quickly shook the original interest groups in the Kes Mountains with their experience in war and their large numbers. A large number of ordinary adventurers and adventure groups were defeated by them and forced to withdraw from the Kes Mountains. However, although the militarized adventure groups are very good at fighting and killing, they are not very good at developing extraordinary resources and trading in the market. Therefore, since the military adventure group cannot seamlessly replace the position of the ordinary adventure group, the interest network of the Kes Mountains has a whole. Originally, this problem was not very serious. It would be fine if the military adventure group replaced it after getting familiar with it. At most, there would be a little fluctuation. However, as other forces chose to add fuel to the flames in order to gain more benefits, small problems also expanded rapidly. What was originally just a competition for interests between the emerging military adventure group and the old traditional adventure group has expanded into a major reshuffle of the interest groups in the Kes Mountains, a new round of interest struggles and redistribution among various forces. Roland played with the wine glass in his right hand, thinking silently in his heart. In the memory of his previous life, this struggle for interests ended with mutual compromise between humans. The Kingdom of Inter and the Silver Empire, which had just ended the Rose War and were not very stable internally, did not want to have any major conflicts again. The two sides reached a compromise, united the Moon Elves, suppressed the internal and external forces that tried to make trouble, and redistributed the interests of the Kes Mountains. However, this will happen in 2 or 3 years, that is, the current chaos will continue for at least 2 years. It seems that you can't be too arrogant in the Kes Mountains, you have to be careful, and you can't expose too many things, otherwise it will be bad if you are targeted by any force. Just as Roland was thinking, a woman passed by the table and sat directly next to Roland. The moment she sat down, Hela, who was sitting opposite Roland, stared at her instantly, and Roland also raised his eyebrows slightly and turned his head to look over. This was a very bold female adventurer, tall and slender. Although she was wearing a cloak, the clothes under the cloak were quite revealing. Except for some private areas, more than 80% of her upper body was exposed. Her eyes were slightly raised, revealing a hint of charm, and her long brown hair fluttered gently in the breeze. So poor, can't even afford a piece of clothing? Roland glanced at it and thought subconsciously in his heart. However, he quickly reacted, put down the wine glass, and said calmly. I don't need special services, and I don't have money. You can find someone else. Adventurer and tavern and revealing women, although Roland has never experienced it, he has heard of it. Hearing Roland's words, the female adventurer who was originally smiling froze directly, and a trace of anger flashed in her eyes. However, she quickly hid her dissatisfaction, chuckled charmingly, stretched out her hand across Roland's face, and chuckled. Little guy, I'm not the kind of person who takes things lightly. Roland grabbed her hand, looked at her calmly, and said. In that case, do I know you? The female adventurer showed a look of pain on her face and said shyly. You pinched me. Roland looked at her expressionlessly. He was not a newbie. With the physical fitness of the adventurer in front of him, he didn't use any force, so how could it hurt? Therefore, Roland ignored it and asked calmly. If you have something to say, please tell me. If you have nothing to do, please leave. She looked at Roland pretending to be aggrieved. However, seeing that Roland had no intention of being soft-hearted, she bit her lip and said aggrievedly. I'm here to thank you. Thank me. Roland was a little confused and looked her up and down, searching for similar existences in his memory. In her expectant eyes, Roland shook his head and said. I don't know you. You have the wrong person. Roland let go of her hand and said with a slightly gentler tone. Leave and don't disturb us. Chapter 48. However, as soon as Roland let go, she wanted to fall on him. Roland frowned, grabbed her hand again and pushed her away. Have you forgotten? Her eyes were filled with tears, and she looked at Roland and said kindly. A few days ago, when I was being hunted, you saved me. If it weren't for you, I would have been caught by those barbarians. Those unreasonable barbarians saw that we had gained something, and not only did they brutally sneak attack and kill my friends, but even after we handed over the harvest, they refused to let us go and kept hunting us. If it weren't for you, I might have died a few days ago. I have discussed with everyone in the group, and we are willing to share our harvest with you. In addition. As she said this, her face was slightly red, and her right hand nervously untied the cloak on her body, and she said softly. If you don't mind, I do. Roland interrupted her calmly. Hearing this, her face froze instantly, and she didn't know what to do for a moment. Just when she forced a smile and was about to say something else, Roland looked at her and said coldly. It's you. At her reminder, Roland also recalled the fight between the two adventure groups he encountered on the road a few days ago. After a careful comparison, the female adventurer in front of him was the leader of the escape team, wasn't she? Originally, Roland didn't care much. After all, it was just a fight between two small adventure teams, and it had nothing to do with him. Although it was a bit unpleasant to block disasters for others, he was too lazy to waste time. However, where did she get the confidence to take the initiative to find him? She didn't think Roland couldn't see her purpose, did she? Roland grabbed her neck with his right hand and said coldly. I didn't look for you, but you came to me. Stupid, sharing the harvest? You can't hold on to what you have, and you can't fight against the Iron Shield Adventure Group, so you want to use me to continue to prevent disasters. Do you think I can't see it? No, that's not what I mean. She grabbed Roland's right hand with both hands, trying to pry it apart, struggling to say. I'm sincere. Sincere? What sincerity did you have when you used me to prevent disasters before? Roland said coldly. Although I don't know how you found me, the idea is pretty good. If I'm weak, fighting with Iron Shield can help you escape. If I'm strong, you want to use this as an excuse to get close to me. I don't know where you get your confidence from. Roland looked at her struggling in his hand and said calmly. Are you ready to face death? Just when Roland was about to crush her to death, with several sounds of breaking through the air, several arrows shot at Roland from the corner. At the same time, more than a dozen adventurers also rushed out from the corner. However, just as the arrows flew over, Hela, who had been watching, took action. A one-ring spell easily blocked all the attacks. The other adventurers on the side also noticed the situation here. While continuing to eat and drink, they looked over here with an attitude of watching the fun. The people at the tables near Roland decisively threw down their bowls and chopsticks, moved away, found a new place, and looked at Roland with interest. However, most adventurers still didn't care about the situation here at all, and made noises as usual. They were not surprised by the situation on Roland's side, as if they had already gotten used to it. It's just a fight between adventurers. There are only a few people. It's not surprising. There's nothing to see. Unless the number of people fighting exceeds 100, even if they report it to the city defense army, they are too lazy to care. A dozen adventurers rushed over, shouting various threatening words. Asshole, put sister-in-law down. Shameless guy, who do you think you are? Kill them all. They rushed over with a roar. Roland ignored them, grabbed the female adventurer with one hand, and looked at them calmly. Hela stood up from her seat. She turned around and coldly swept all the adventurers who rushed over. 2 first-ring knights, the rest were either knight squires or just ordinary people who were a little stronger, and there was no threat at all. Hela didn't even take out the elf staff, using a few gestures as an aid, and directly cast a spell with bare hands. First ring spell Shadow Arrow. After Hela made her move, a thin film of light appeared on the bodies of nearly half of the dozen adventurers who rushed over, and they faced Hela's attack aggressively, without any intention of dodging. Then, Hela's spell easily penetrated their fragile defense. However, they did not have time to be surprised, because, with Hela's high-speed spell, after the first person's defense was penetrated, they were covered by Hela's spells in less than 5 seconds before they could react, and died on the spot. Roland looked at the struggling adventurer in his hand. When she saw that her backup plan was easily solved, she showed fear and regret on her face, and kept begging Roland. I was wrong, I know I was wrong, I really know I was wrong. Roland chuckled. Through physical contact, Roland knew her true thoughts clearly. He shook his head and said, "No, you don't know you're wrong, you know you're going to die." After saying that, Roland released the prepared spiritual spell. Second level spell Soul Shock. Her fragile soul was defeated by Roland without any resistance, annihilated, and turned into nothingness. Then, Roland casually threw the body in his hand aside. Seeing that the dispute ended quickly, the adventurers who were watching the show were also somewhat disappointed. Boring, I want to see a river of blood. This is what many adventurers think. However, under the deterrence shown by Roland and Hela, they did not dare to say anything. After all, there was no conflict, and they did not want to provoke 2 unfathomable spellcasters, so they had to turn around and continue eating and drinking. Where's the cleaner? Come up to wash the floor. Several adventurers near the stairs shouted to the downstairs. Afterwards, not long after, several strong cleaners with blood-stained bags, mops, and buckets walked up to the second floor. They took a glance and soon found the body near Roland. They quickly arrived near Roland, stuffed all the fallen bodies into bags and dragged them away, then used mops and wooden buckets to quickly clean up all the blood on the floor. In less than a few minutes, the cleaners cleaned up the place completely, and there was no sign that there were more than a dozen bodies lying on the floor. They even sprinkled a little special powder to cover up the bloody smell with a special fragrance. Chapter 49. In the hotel room, Roland sat on a chair and slowly flipped through the memory of the female adventurer who had come to him. Although she was only at the level of the first ring, she could only be considered a backbone force in Tianyun City. Moreover, there were a lot of useless content in her memory, including various memories of parties and eating, drinking and having fun. However, Roland still extracted useful information from it, filling the gap in the basic intelligence in his original intelligence. In addition, he also knew about their conflict with the Iron Shield Adventure Group. In short, the female adventurer had planted an undercover agent in the Iron Shield Adventure Group, and through the undercover agent, she learned that the Iron Shield Adventure Group had discovered a small ruin. Then, when the main force of the Iron Shield Adventure Group was exploring the ruins, the female adventurer sneaked in and attacked the remaining troops of the Iron Shield Adventure Group, and robbed some of the exploration fruits of the Iron Shield in the ruins. The main reason for the pursuit was that the female adventurer robbed the key to the next level of the ruins. As for how she locked Roland before, it was because she had hooked up with a first-ring spellcaster of the prophecy system. The eyes of the spellcaster who came out of the Tower of Truth were full of innocence, and he was fooled by the female adventurer. Not only did he help the female adventurer become a knight of the first ring, but when he left, he reluctantly gave her a ring that could use the first ring prophecy spell 5 times. Roland rubbed his head. He was not quite used to reading the soul memory. The effect of mental spells in reality is still different from that in the game. In the game, the effect of reading the soul memory spell is that the system directly displays the useful information in front of you. In reality, Roland has to find useful information in her complex memory by himself. Since Roland directly broke the soul fragments and roughly disassembled her memory, Roland just fast-forwarded and watched a movie that was thousands of hours long. Although it was a bit uncomfortable, it did not affect him much. Roland drank a sip of cold water, and the cool feeling made his head a little clearer. Most of the relics in the Kes Mountains come from Littorio, the first emperor of the Silver Empire, a legendary spellcaster who swept across the entire Sinner and ruled for decades before suddenly dying bizarrely. According to historical records, Littorio established a large number of research laboratories in the Kes Mountains, exploring the essence of magic and exploring the future of the extraordinary path. However, after Littorio's bizarre death, all the research laboratories he established were buried deep in the Kes Mountains, and over time, they became the current relics. After his death, many extraordinary people believed that Littorio's legacy after his death, or the secret, was hidden in a research laboratory in the Kes Mountains. In order to compete for the legacy of this great legend, the fight around the Kes Mountains has never stopped, but after more than 1,000 years, the extraordinary people are not so enthusiastic about this possible legacy. After all, in more than 1,000 years of history, more than a dozen extraordinary people of the 8th and 9th rings have come, but they still can't dig anything out. Even in the previous life, players who have been keen on studying the background of the game can't figure out how Littorio died. Now, the various forces are fighting over the Kes Mountains, mainly for the various extraordinary materials buried in these ruins. After all, that was the peak period of the Silver Empire. It was not surprising that anything could be dug out of the research laboratory built by the national strength. And Roland's purpose in coming to the Kes Mountains was also these ruins. Because of his memories from his previous life, Roland knew the coordinates of some ruins that had not yet been discovered. As long as he dug up a large ruin and moved the resources stored in it, before he was promoted to a higher level, Roland would not have to worry about the resources for his and Hela's promotion in the future. Therefore, Roland was not very interested in the small ruins in the female adventurer's memory. How many gold coins can be exploded from the small ruins? Instead of competing with others for this little money, why didn't he dig those large ruins that have not yet been discovered? When Roland came back to his senses from his wild thoughts and uncomfortable feeling of vomiting, the sky outside had completely darkened. He flipped through his memories. Did it take so long? Roland looked at the dark sky and bright street lights outside and was also a little surprised. I don't know how long it took. Roland looked at Hela who was lying on the table and fell asleep. He couldn't ask her. Forget it, it doesn't matter anyway. Since she fell asleep, there is no need to wake her up. Roland stood up and carefully moved his stiff body. Then, he carried Hela who was lying on the table to her bed and covered her with a quilt. He didn't feel sleepy, so he found a place to meditate to kill time. In the next few days, Roland continued to collect intelligence while silently preparing to enter the Kes Mountains. Since the extraordinary people in the Kes Mountains basically try to dig up the ruins, Roland's acquisition did not attract much attention. In addition, because Roland and Hela showed their strength in the tavern, Roland also received polite invitations from various adventure groups in the past few days. Although he felt a bit annoyed, their attitudes were quite sincere. Having received a complete compulsory education in his previous life, he did not directly tell them to get lost. He could only politely refuse them one by one and stated that he had his own plans. However, because Roland had a good attitude, many adventure groups harassed him one by one with the idea of giving it a try. After being annoyed for several days, Roland finally couldn't stand it anymore. After rejecting the invitation of an unknown adventure group, he decisively took all the tools he bought and dragged Hela to leave the city overnight. I said I wouldn't join any adventure group, but you still bother me, damn. Roland leaned against a big tree, looked up at the treetops, and said unhappily. Hela squatted aside and asked Roland curiously. In fact, there is no need to be so nice to them, especially those small adventure groups. Just catch someone, beat him up and throw him out, that's all. Roland sat up, put his hands together, and said. I'm not the kind of violent person who will beat and kill people if I don't agree with them. Although they are a bit annoying, the adventure group that was rejected didn't come again, so I won't beat them. Hela, you came from the tribe, you should know the status of ordinary people in front of extraordinary people. As long as I beat them and throw them out, no one will offend an extraordinary person for the life and death of an ordinary person. If you beat them lightly, it won't have a warning effect, and if you seriously injure and cripple them, if you don't treat them, they can only wait to die. Although Roland likes to kill all enemies and root them out, as long as there is no hostility, Roland will not hurt or kill people because of such a small matter. Listening to Roland's words, Hela nodded. Chapter 50. Littorio, the only human leader of Sinner, the founding emperor of the Silver Empire, the founder of the Tower of Truth, a famous feudal emperor, politician, military strategist, and spellcaster in history. This emperor, who personally pacified and unified the human forces of Sinner, established the approximate sphere of influence of humans in Sinner, established the feudal system of the Silver Empire that has continued to this day, the Silver Agreement, the electoral prince, the military nobility, the free city, established a more inclusive political system, established an environment for harmonious coexistence between humans and domestic aliens, and became the second recognized human empire after the central kingdom of the first human empire. In addition to personally founding the Silver Empire, Littorio also created the Tower of Truth, sorted out the chaotic extraordinary system of humans, and established the extraordinary system of today's knights and spellcasters. The relatively vague hierarchy system of apprentice-trainee elite archmage legend was abolished and replaced with a more specific and clear 9-ring hierarchy system. He established the concept of a school, encouraged the spread and teaching of extraordinary knowledge among spellcasters, and led by example, let the spellcasters of the Tower of Truth actively recruit apprentices, expanded the base of spellcasters, and promoted the common progress of spellcasters. In addition to his achievements in domestic affairs, Littorio is also a powerful military strategist. Internally, he struck hard, defeated all noble resistance forces and various local separatist forces, and powerfully unified all human forces in Sinner. At the same time, he suppressed the Lilliputian country that tried to be independent, crushed the dwarf restorationist forces, and brought them all under the rule of the Silver Empire. Externally, he launched an expedition, directly crushed the undead disaster at its peak, expelled the rampant Knoll tribe on the southern coast, dismembered the dog-headed man who tried to split the Silver Empire, and at the same time, conquered the Kos Mountains where countless extraordinary creatures lived, brought them under the rule of the Silver Empire, forced the alien races to recognize the legitimate sovereignty of the Silver Empire, and established the status of humans in Sinner. At the same time, as a famous legendary spellcaster, Littorio is also a qualified explorer. In order to explore the unknown future, he concentrated the national power of the Silver Empire, recruited a large number of spellcasters, and established large and small research laboratories in the Kes Mountains. In his hands, a powerful and prosperous emerging empire is slowly rising. Then, this prosperity was interrupted. Littorio's rule lasted less than 50 years and ended. This great emperor did not have any offspring, and did not designate any heirs during his lifetime. There was no second person in the Silver Empire after the emperor. There were many internal conflicts among the 13 silver families with the right to vote. In the areas conquered by Littorio by force, the independent factions who accepted Littorio's rule but were unwilling to accept the rule of the silver families were ready to move. Therefore, after the silver families hastily completed his funeral in 3 days, the civil war broke out. The final result was that the huge Silver Empire was divided, more than 2/3 of the land became independent, and independent human kingdoms were re-established one by one. Even Roland didn't know the specific cause of Littorio's death. The history of the Silver Empire records that Littorio died of natural old age, but how could a legendary spellcaster live longer than a high-level spellcaster? Moreover, 1 month before Littorio's death, he suddenly and mysteriously expelled all the people in the Kes Mountains, and then the Kes Mountains experienced an earthquake that lasted for a month. After that, the Silver family announced his death and the mysterious disappearance of all the laboratories in the Kes Mountains. Therefore, for Littorio's death, basically those who know a little bit about it don't think he died of natural causes, and there must be a huge conspiracy. Many extraordinary people believe that Littorio is not dead, and combined with his sudden blockade of the Kes Mountains, they also imagine that even if Littorio died, he would die in the Kes Mountains. Therefore, even in order to compete for the position of the second Silver Emperor, a bloody civil war tore the Silver Empire apart. Many extraordinary people went to the Kes Mountains for various reasons. Some hoped to find Littorio and end the bloody civil war in the Silver Empire, Some want to find his legacy and increase the possibility of seizing the throne of the Silver Empire, and some are simply looking for valuable things or knowledge. So, is Lit Oreo really dead? Listening to Roland's introduction, Hella raised her hand and asked curiously. Well, good question, I don't know either. Roland shrugged and answered slowly while breaking the seal in front of him. Although it has been nearly 1,000 years since the news of his death broke, and the natural lifespan of a legend is 500 years, if there were no accidents, he might have died of old age. But, natural lifespan is just natural lifespan. As a legendary spellcaster, it is not difficult to extend your life. So, even after so many years, whether Lit Oreo is dead or alive is still a difficult mystery to solve. Now, it is estimated that only those silver families know the truth. Okay, open it. As he said, Roland completed the cracking of the seal in front of him, stretched out his right hand and pushed open the ruins in front of him, and a rotten smell came out from it. This naturally had no effect on Roland and Hella. They were well prepared and had already used magic to support a gas-isolating shield. A ball of light slowly rose from Roland's left hand, illuminating the surroundings. Except for the gate of the ruins in front of them, Roland and Hella were surrounded by sealed soil. Although they knew the coordinates of the ruins, Roland and Hella were just two people. If they dug directly, it would make too much noise and easily attract the attention of others. And Roland didn't want to be disturbed by others. The most important point was that the excavation of large ruins would easily attract the attention of big forces. Therefore, Roland did not choose to dig with magic. Instead, he let the grey crow that could be virtual dive into the ground to find the location of the ruins, and then let it bring a space anchor point to the door. Finally, Roland used space magic to transfer the soil next to the anchor point. After digging out the space, the two of them teleported over. Hella looked at the thick dark elements emerging from the ruins and asked Roland curiously. Is this laboratory for studying the undead? I feel that there seems to be the breath of the undead in it. Not exactly. Roland shook his head and added. This is mainly a laboratory for studying dark elements and negative energy, and the undead are only a small part of it. Negative energy. Chapter 51. Roland held a large ball of light in his hand and walked cautiously at the front of the road. Although Roland had been to this large ruins in his previous life, when he came, the entire large ruins had been dug deep into the ground, and all dangers had been thoroughly checked. So Roland didn't know what he would encounter. However, Roland was not very worried about encountering any major dangers. With his rich exploration experience, Roland didn't think that this old thing from more than 1,000 years ago could bring any danger. Moreover, Roland was just protecting Hella behind him, not the real vanguard. The real vanguard was Hella's magic pet, Grey Crow. Grey Crow can ignore all physical damage and its petite and flexible body makes it undoubtedly the best existence to act as a vanguard. Through virtualization, it can pass through most of the walls of the ruins without stimulating the defensive measures left in the ruins. Combined with the vision that Roland cast on the Grey Crow through magic, Roland was able to understand the general situation inside the ruins. Combined with Roland's understanding of various ruins in his previous life, he was able to successfully avoid many dangerous rooms and move forward to the warehouse area of the ruins. After an unknown amount of time in the underground ruins, Roland stopped in front of a steel gate. And the virtual Grey Crow also flew out of the steel gate, materialized and landed on Hella's shoulder, and called twice. You said there is a group of undead inside. Hella looked at the Grey Crow and said with some surprise. Are there really so many undead who can survive until now? In the dense dark element environment, the dormant undead basically have little loss, so it's not surprising that they can survive until now. Roland said casually while breaking the seal on the steel gate. Protect your mind and spirit, the big one is coming. Roland easily untied the seal, and before opening the door, he turned around and instructed Hella. Hella nodded and cast a spell on herself decisively, adding several layers of protection to her mind and spirit. I'm ready. Hella responded only after she finished casting the spell. After receiving the response, Roland also nodded slightly and pushed open the door in front of him with both hands. Then, dark elements filled with countless negative emotions poured out of the door, indiscriminately attacking Roland and Hella. The malice released by this negative energy that has accumulated for thousands of years is not only almost materialized, but also carries a stench of corruption. As the door opened, the accumulated dark elements and negative energy flowed again, and the undead inside the door who sensed the life breath of Roland and Hella also moved a little sluggishly. Groups of soul fires of different colors lit up again in the dark room. At the same time, Powerful auras emerged from them. Among the nearly 100 undead auras, the weakest one was at the level of the second ring, and the powerful one even reached the level of the sixth ring. If it weren't for the amazing storage of supplies in the warehouse behind them, Roland would definitely run away with Hela behind him when he encountered such a powerful and large group of undead. After all, the fourth ring is a threshold. Low-level extraordinary people basically cannot fight against four-ring extraordinary people without external forces. The extraordinary people who have completed the first sublimation have basically completed the transformation and can mobilize elements on a large scale. Compared with the three-ring extraordinary people, their combat effectiveness is an amazing improvement and leap. At the same time, the sublimated extraordinary people will basically have more or less extraordinary resistance, reducing or even immune to the attacks of low-level extraordinary people. Even a four-ring extraordinary person who has just completed sublimation can easily destroy an army of thousands of people and determine the outcome of a battle. In short, in the absence of external forces, both sides are equal, and one-on-one, it is impossible for low-level extraordinary people to defeat mid-level extraordinary people. If low-level extraordinary people want to fight against mid-level extraordinary people, they can only fight with their lives. However, since Roland dared to open the door, he naturally had his own confidence. Looking at the slowly recovering undead, Roland reached out and took out the High Priest's staff from the space ring. Inside the staff, Roland mobilized the blessings accumulated by the cult organization for countless years. With the blessing, Roland's mental power briefly increased to the level of the sixth ring, and then Roland seized the time and cast a spell quickly. Sixth ring spell Purification. Sixth ring spell Holy Light. Roland quickly cast two positive energy spells that specifically countered the undead. With the activation of the purification spell effect, the accumulated negative energy in the room and the positive energy gushing out of the staff quickly intertwined together and were neutralized and disappeared. The environment of the room was quickly reversed, which also caused the newly awakened natural undead to feel uncomfortable and weakened by several layers. Then, the dazzling golden light of the holy light bloomed around the light ball above Roland's head. After dormancy for 1,000 years, the newly awakened and extremely weak undead quickly collapsed under this powerful spell that restrained them. Even the only six-ring natural undead only lasted half a minute longer. After confirming that all the undead were completely dead, Roland stopped consuming the blessing, and the skyrocketing false mental power fell back to its original level. Roland waved the High Priest's staff in his hand, and Roland consumed almost 1/20th of the blessing in it. He put the staff back into the space ring with some heartache. This was Roland's trump card that he finally snatched from the hands of the High Priest and used to fight against mid to high-level extraordinary beings. While retracting the staff, the effects of the two six-ring spells also quickly weakened, leaving only a little aftermath and traces. Seeing this, Hela, who had just subconsciously run far away, slowly walked back to Roland's side. "What's wrong?" Roland looked at her and said with some surprise. "Are you afraid I'll hit you?" "No." Hela shook her head and said somewhat cautiously. "I felt a little strange about you just now." "Strangeness?" Roland raised his eyebrows, recalled the memories of his previous life, and said with a frown. "It should be the reason why you only learn necromancy at the moment. Using dark elements for a long time will inevitably lead to negative energy. It's not surprising that you feel disgusted with positive energy." Roland shook his head and added. "This is not a good thing. It will become an obvious shortcoming for you. In a few days, I will teach you how to view and use positive and negative energy. Once you learn it, you can maintain the balance of positive and negative energy in your body." Hela blinked, nodded in agreement with Roland's proposal, and asked curiously. "What is positive and negative energy?" "It can be understood as a kind of power that comes from emotions. Simply put, positive emotions generate positive energy, and negative emotions generate negative energy. Compared to stable elements, positive and negative energy are quite unstable and can easily convert between each other. They are generally only used as auxiliary energy." Chapter 52. Hela lowered her head, thinking silently about Roland's explanation in combination with the books she had read, and followed Roland. Roland directed Grey Crow to continue exploring while slowly walking through the undead laboratory. After passing through several rooms and going deep into the periphery, Roland successfully arrived at his destination this time. A branch warehouse located at the outermost periphery. Pushing open the door of the warehouse, a large number of different element fluctuations came out of the door. Roland pulled Hela into the warehouse and quickly closed the door again. After closing the door again, Roland turned around and looked inside the warehouse. Although it was only a small warehouse at the outermost periphery, the reserves of this warehouse were still quite amazing. Hundreds of shelves were divided into plant, biological and mineral categories, and all kinds of relatively rare and precious extraordinary materials were almost filled with shelves. In addition to the shelves, there were also a large number of boxes piled up in the corners of the warehouse, which naturally stored relatively ordinary extraordinary materials. Roland walked to the nearest shelf and touched the rotten extraordinary herbs on the shelf with some heartache. Although the storage technology of this warehouse is powerful, the shelves and boxes are tightly sealed and the time array to prevent rot. However, after more than 1,000 years, some seals and arrays still have problems. After losing the protection of the array, perishable things such as herbs, biological parts, and eggs have now completely rotted into a pile. However, minerals are better. Even if they have lost their protection, most of them are still in normal condition. Roland did not hesitate and immediately checked every container and box in the warehouse. He rescued some damaged containers and boxes whose contents were not completely broken. At the same time, he counted the storage in the warehouse. After Roland and Hella worked together for several days, they finally counted the storage in this warehouse. Red steel is a relatively rare supernatural metal, but as long as 1 or 2 kilograms of it is mixed into the armor, it will not only have extremely strong defense, but also have resistance to weak elements, and can withstand some ordinary elemental attacks. Then, there are almost 2 tons of red steel in this warehouse. Although there are not so many supernatural metals except red steel, most of them are in kilograms. However, although the number is not large, the variety is quite complete, which is enough for Roland and Hella to squander. In terms of herbs, the number and variety of dark element herbs are the largest. Although there are herbs of other elements, the number and variety are relatively small. If dark elements are used for promotion, Roland and Hella will have enough ritual materials for promotion to the 3rd ring. As for the biological category, there are not many left. The parts removed from the supernatural creatures have been wiped out and rotted away. Only the magic pet eggs have 5 alive in a pile of dead eggs. Although the types are not clear, the fact that they have survived until now itself shows their value. If Roland moved all the low-level extraordinary materials in the warehouse out and sold them, it would be worth tens of millions of gold coins if he conservatively estimated it. As for the rare and precious extraordinary materials in the warehouse, they were not something that could be measured by money. However, Roland could only think about this idea. Under the situation where extraordinary materials were jointly monopolized by major forces, he did not dare to sell extraordinary materials on a large scale. After all, if too many were exported, it would be easy to be targeted. At that time, many extraordinary people would rather rob directly than buy. So, Roland became rich, but not completely rich. After counting the extraordinary materials and strengthening the storage, Roland used the space ring to install some of the materials he needed. Then, he took Hella to the training room inside the ruins, fiddled with it for most of the day, and restarted the training room. After restarting the training room and having a strong elemental environment, Roland and Hella began their boring meditation and study life. With sufficient materials, Roland could finally stop caring about the cost-effectiveness and directly pile up materials, using the best meditation auxiliary array to make various expensive alchemical potions to assist in cultivation. And Hella could finally let go and practice various spells in the practice room at will. Anyway, with Hella's level, it is impossible to damage the practice room no matter what, and even if it is damaged, Hella can just change another practice room. Anyway, the ruins are so big that there are plenty of practice rooms. In addition to daily practice, Roland would also command Grey Crow to explore and draw a rough map of the ruins, searching for other valuable areas in the ruins. In Roland's first month in the ruins, he found 2 resource warehouses and a peripheral library. There is nothing much to say about the resource warehouse. The resource types and quantities are similar to the first warehouse, and in the peripheral library, Roland found a large number of basic extraordinary books. Although more than 1,000 years have passed, these books are already relatively backward, but the basic content is still common and valuable, so Roland ran a few times, moved all the books inside, and threw them to Hella. Let her watch him learn first, and then ask him if she doesn't understand. In an open space, in an environment with dense dark elements, Roland was meditating silently with his eyes closed. Around him, a delicate magic circle was absorbing the surrounding dark elements, constantly improving and stabilizing the dense dark element environment around Roland. As Roland meditated, the dark elements around him continued to flow into his body and were continuously converted into magic power. Then, these magic powers merged into his body and began to promote the evolution of his body and spirit. Roland has been doing this for a long time. There are basically no accidents in the promotion of spellcasters, and everything goes smoothly. Roland, who had reached the peak of the second ring when he left the north, finally broke through the limit of the second ring after several months of accumulation. As Roland began to advance to the third ring, the dark elements around him flowed into his body at a speed visible to the naked eye. When the concentration of dark elements around him dropped rapidly, the formation that Roland arranged on the side was activated. After the formation was activated, a bucket of black liquid placed on the formation began to boil, and a large amount of dark elements floated out of the liquid and flowed into Roland's body under the strong suction, helping his promotion. This promotion lasted for most of the day. But when Roland opened his eyes, the black liquid in the wooden barrel beside him had become clear and transparent, and the leaking spiritual power flashed in his eyes. He frowned, and while calming his somewhat restless spirit, he also cast a third-level spell to consume the excess magic power in his body. Third-level spell Prophecy Induction. Chapter 53. As the prophecy spell was cast, some scattered fragments of the future also appeared in Roland's mind. He saw a person walked out of a tall and blurry wizard tower. He walked into Tianyun City in a dusty manner. He walked out of Yuntian City with murderous intent and walked into the Kes Mountains. He came to the top of the ruins where Roland was, and after circling around a few times, he looked underground. He pushed open the door of the ruins in surprise. Finally, Roland saw the sea of fire that ignited a small area of the Kes Mountains. Originally, it was just to consume the overflowing magic power in the body, so he chose a prophecy spell that had no lethality and could only predict his own future. Unexpectedly, he really predicted something. Roland completed the spell and thought thoughtfully about the predicted future fragments. Although the face of the person in the prophecy was blurry, he was related to the wizard tower, and it was likely that he was the caster of the Tower of Truth. The only person who was barely related to Roland was the first ring prophecy caster in the memory of the female adventurer who was killed some time ago. If the person in the fragment was him, it would make a lot more sense. In order to see the female adventurer, he walked out of the Tower of Truth and came to Tianyun City, and then found that the female adventurer was dead. In order to avenge her, he locked Roland's position through prophecy spells. Then, after arriving at the ground above Roland's head, he still couldn't find Roland after searching for a few days. He used prophecy spells to confirm that Roland was underground. In order to avenge him, he directly dug, and thus he found the ruins. In the last fragment, it is likely that the news of the ruins under Roland's feet was leaked, and the extraordinary people sent by various forces fought for the ruins. However, the only question is, how did he lock Roland's position through prophecy spells? The prophecy system is notoriously difficult to learn. Unless he cheats, he is probably just a second-ring prophecy caster. How could a second-ring prophecy spell caster predict the location of Roland, a third-ring spell caster, relying solely on his own words? So, he probably borrowed external forces. Combined with the news of the ruins that was exposed later. Tisk, is he the second generation of the Tower of Truth, or a favored apprentice under the command of a great wizard? Roland frowned slightly when he thought of this. In the absence of deep hatred and conflict of interest, Roland did not want to make enemies with powerful extraordinary people. It seems that we have to prepare in advance and prepare a ground base to attract him. Although he is likely to come for revenge, considering that he is just a dog that the female adventurer is hanging on to, and the forces behind him. Just hang him up and beat him up. After making a decision, Roland stood up again and moved his hands and feet. Then, Roland picked up a mirror. Looking at his eyes that turned grey again, Roland was also a little helpless. Although Roland is proficient in various spells, due to limited circumstances, Roland can only focus on the dark element as the main direction of improvement. The foundation is completed with the blessing of the undead sub-plane, and the promotion to the second ring is also pulled up with the blessing of sacrifice. Originally, after the promotion to the second ring, Roland adjusted the balance in his body for more than half a month before eliminating the influence of the dark element and returning to normal. However, since the promotion to the third ring is completed by relying on the dark element, this influence on the body has once again appeared on Roland. If it was just the change of color of the eyes, Roland would not mind it very much. Anyway, grey eyes are also very handsome, but due to the residual blessing of the undead sub-plane in the body, the dark element will slowly transform Roland's body and soul into an undead creature. This is not good news. Roland is a good living person, why would he become an undead for no reason? Even if Roland was allowed to transform into a lich, Roland would not be happy, let alone being transformed into an ordinary undead. However, Roland was not in a hurry. This transformation was not irreversible. It would probably take a month or two to recover. Oh, by the way, although Hela had also received the blessing of the undead plane and also relied on the dark elements to advance, because Hela had a very high affinity for the dark elements, it could be said that she was a natural dead body. Therefore, the remaining blessings and dark elements became the nourishment for her body evolution and could not affect her. Roland stared at the grey eyes in the mirror for a while, and felt that he was more accustomed to his white hair and red pupils. The grey eyes looked too lifeless. He shook his head, put the mirror away, and walked out of the room. Outside the room, Hela was sitting on a chair reading a book. After hearing the door open, she looked up and said, "Dinner and bath water are ready. Do you want to eat first or take a bath first?" "Thank you, take a bath first. I feel dirty." Roland smelled the clothes on his body, and said with a hint of difficulty on his face. Hela nodded, closed the book in her hand, stood up from the chair and said, "Follow me." Roland followed Hela to an empty room, where 2 large buckets of hot water were placed on the open space. Hela stood at the door and said softly, "I'll wait for you outside. If you need anything, you can call me." After that, Hela closed the door. After the door was closed, Roland immediately took off his clothes, threw them into a small wooden basin beside him, and walked towards the hot water. Although not much filth was removed in this promotion, Roland couldn't stand the sticky feeling. Strictly speaking, the promotion from 1 to 3 rings is to prepare for the promotion to the 4th ring. In each promotion at a low level, the body will evolve and remove impurities in the body. Especially for ordinary people like Roland and Hela who officially embarked on the extraordinary path in their teens, there are quite a lot of impurities accumulated in their bodies. Even though Roland had been consciously removing impurities in his body through alchemical potions in advance after awakening his memory, he still removed a lot of impurities when he was promoted to the 3rd ring, which made Roland feel a little smelly. In fact, the large amount of impurities accumulated in the body is one of the main reasons why wild mages find it difficult to be promoted. Unlike the casters of the inherited school, they can reduce the number of impurities in their bodies through various means such as controlling diet and alchemical potions. They can only rely on the opportunity of promotion to remove impurities. However, because there are too many accumulated impurities, more energy and time are needed to remove them, so their promotion will be more difficult. Even because when they are promoted, the energy used to evolve the body is more consumed in removing impurities, their evolution will be weaker. Especially after being promoted to the 3rd ring, the wild mage must be promoted to the 4th ring and complete the 1st sublimation before the impurities in the body accumulate again. Otherwise, once the impurities accumulate, unless they get the help of the school's spellcasters, it is basically impossible to be promoted to the 4th ring in this lifetime. Chapter 54. Roland lay on the chair he had rubbed with his hands, basking in the sun while slowly rocking the chair. In front of Roland, Hela was facing the lake, practicing various spells. The fish in the lake and the creatures that came to drink water were unlucky, being experimented and abused by Hela, or used as targets to experiment the effects of spells on creatures. The lake in front of him was not very big, and the reason why it was always abused by Hela was mainly because Roland purified the entire lake once a day. Otherwise, with Hela's experimental frequency, the lively lake in front of him should have been renamed the Lake of the Dead. Hela dragged the body of a tiger that came to drink water and was killed by her. She picked up the tools and began to dissect it. After being promoted to the 2nd ring, Roland also taught her more knowledge about the dead, including how to use flesh and blood to transform the dead, and how to stuff flesh and skin into the skeletons of the dead. All this starts with dissecting the corpse, getting familiar with and learning how to transform the various organ structures of the dead. Hela skillfully cut off the tiger's entire skin, disassembled its various flesh and blood organs and classified them. Then, Hela injected dark elements into each fresh flesh and blood organ, and tried to transform it into the dead. However, the effect was not good. There are basically only a few fates for the organs handled by Hela. Either they rotted into a pile of rotten meat, or they exploded directly and broke into countless pieces, or only part of them was transformed, and the other part was not successfully transformed. After finally blowing up the tiger's heart, Hela, who had not succeeded, was a little frustrated. She waved her hand and threw all the flesh and blood that she had played with into the lake. And the fish in the lake also swarmed in, devouring the minced meat without any disgust. Hela looked at the school of fish, and after searching carefully for a while, she chose the largest one. It was a big fish about 1.5 meters long. It was you. Hela knocked it unconscious with a mental shock, then reached out and grabbed the big fish that was eating crazily with magic, and directly lifted it out of the lake. Then, Hela chopped off its head with a knife and started a new round of practice. On the side of Hela, a ring of undead was picking up the tiger skin from before and trying to put it on his body. At this moment, it was already covered with dozens of messy animal skins, and at the same time, under the animal skins, it would occasionally fall some scattered pieces of meat. Under the influence of Hela, although it didn't understand much, it also stuffed meat and covered itself with skin. Although it was useless, it didn't have any effect anyway, so Roland and Hela didn't bother to care about it, so let it do whatever it wanted. While Hela was dissecting the big fish in front of her, a grey shadow also fell from midair and swallowed the fish head that Hela had cut off in one gulp. The grey crow smacked its mouth and swallowed the fish head in one gulp, then it looked at the lively school of fish in the lake beside it. It rushed over directly, grabbed a big fish with its claws, flew to a small tree nearby, and then let go of the fish in its claws and tasted it slowly. Around the grey crow eating, neatly arranged small trees were swaying in the wind. They are also one of Hela's experimental products, born through spells. Necromancer spells must be learned, but other spells must also be learned. As a full system wizard, Roland will definitely not only teach Hela the knowledge and spells of the necromancy system. Although it is just a prejudice, most NPC spellcasters who specialize in necromancy are psychologically abnormal. Players who specialize in necromancy are similar. I don't know if they play the undead for too long from time to time, and their personalities and tastes have become a lot abnormal. Anyway, all the necromancers Roland met were quite perverted. Roland didn't want Hela to become a necromancer with a strong taste and a little perverted, so Roland taught her some knowledge of life and positive energy spells to balance it out. Under Roland's teaching, Hela did not discriminate against other spells and was happy to become a spellcaster who was proficient in all spells. Roland yawned, half closed his eyes, and meditated calmly to improve himself. Knowing that a prophecy spellcaster might come to him at any time, Roland specifically found such a feng shui treasure land on the outskirts of the Kes Mountains. Roland even built a wooden house by the lake and lived there for a long time. In addition, Roland also arranged a large number of warning arrays around the wooden house to ensure that he would know in advance if someone came. Moreover, except when the materials in the space ring were used up, Roland would go to the ruins to get another batch of materials, otherwise, the two of them basically stayed here all the time. Why haven't people come yet? Roland opened his eyes, looked at the bright sun in the sky, and thought a little bored. Although as a daydreamer, he still likes this ordinary life now. However, when he knows that someone will come to his door, he will guess when he will come. Bored, Roland stopped meditating, stood up from the chair, and walked slowly to Hela's side. Because Hela was concentrating on converting the flesh and blood organs in front of her, and she was not wary of Roland, she didn't notice Roland approaching at all. After watching Hela fail continuously, Roland shook his head and said, "Let me do it." Hela was startled and leaned back slightly. She blinked her eyes, quickly regained her composure, nodded to Roland, and freed half of her body. Roland squatted down, grabbed Hela's wrist with his right hand, and stretched her hand to the fresh heart. "Don't resist, feel it well." After that, under Roland's guidance and control, Hela's magic began to be injected into the heart. Because of Roland's reminder, Hela did not particularly resist and let Roland control her magic. Then, under Roland's control, Hela's magic smoothly merged into the heart in front of her, and it was transformed into a dead soul very carefully. In order to let Hela feel the transformation process well, Roland must have slowed down the speed, and it took a full minute to transform the entire heart. "Do you understand?" Roland took back his hand and asked softly. Hela looked at the undead heart in front of her, beating slowly, and emitting thick dark elements. She thought for a while and said, "I seem to understand a little bit." "Well, then try again, practice boldly." Roland nodded, said something and stood up again. "Luckily, I went outside to practice a few days ago, otherwise, I wouldn't be so proficient and perfect today." Roland returned to the chair with confidence and lay down again. Although Roland is proficient in all disciplines, he hasn't used such basic necromancy skills for a long time, so he is a little rusty. Chapter 55. Not far from the lake, a spellcaster wearing a robe and covered with leaves and dust was running around. After days of incompetent rage in Tianyun City, he felt relatively calm at the moment. He hid the accumulated anger deep in his heart, waiting for it to explode. And just as he was moving forward according to the direction provided by the prophecy spell, Roland's warning formation on the nearby trees also noticed his approach. Therefore, Roland, who was lying on the chair meditating, sat up, changed his casual clothes into an elf robe, and spoke to Hela, who was still practicing. "Let's take a rest first, people are coming." Hearing Roland's words, Hela nodded, stuffed several successfully undead organs into the undead bodies nearby, then threw the failed ones on the ground into the lake, and cast a simple water spells clean the traces of flesh and blood on the ground. At the same time, the grey crow that ran outside quickly flew back from the distance, fell from the sky, and landed on Hela's shoulder. Roland and Hela didn't wait long. In less than half an hour, a figure emerged from the grass not far away. Looking at the cabin next to the lake, he and Roland Hela looked young. Feeling the aura emanating from Roland and Hela, he was a little surprised when he just walked out of the grass. "Are the elite apprentices of which school training here?" "Passing by, excuse me." He raised his school badge to indicate that he was really just passing by and had no ill intentions. At the same time, he also subconsciously activated the prophecy spell. The ring on his right finger flashed slightly, an array of light flew out of the ring and pointed at Roland. A ring engraved with 6 rings of prophecy spells. No wonder it predicted me. Roland stretched out his right hand, and the elf staff appeared in his hand, speaking calmly. "Are you predicting my position?" After hearing Roland's words, he was a little hesitant and immediately confirmed that Roland was the murderer he was looking for. He didn't answer, and immediately put the school badge into his pocket, and the ring on his right finger began to exert force. A first-level spell fireball. Several fireballs quickly emerged and shot at Roland. Roland calmly waved his staff, relying on his strong mental power to directly disintegrate the fireball's spell structure. After neutralizing his attack, Roland took steps towards him and said casually while walking towards him unhurriedly. "I know you are a fool who was deceived by a woman. What, are you here to avenge her? Is it worth it for an adventurer who deceives you and hangs you?" While Roland was talking, he also continued to attack Roland. Extraordinary rings enchanted with various spell scrolls from the first to second rings. However, these attacks were of no use at all. They could not even stop Roland, and were easily defeated by Roland. A spellcaster who specializes in prophecy? It's really rare. Roland disrupted all his attacks and walked 1 meter in front of him. After seeing that all methods were useless against Roland, his face looked a little gloomy and depressed. Looking at him, Roland said casually. "Seeing as you don't know anything, now, turn around and leave, and I can let you go." Just when Roland relaxed, his eyes sharpened instantly. As he rushed towards Roland, a delicate dagger appeared in his hand. At the same time, the prophecy spell he prepared was also activated. Some subtle changes happened to Roland. Beside him, the 3-ring elemental shield fluctuated slightly, and when he got closer, it briefly lost its effect. At the same time, the spell held in Roland's hand also fluctuated slightly. Although it did not directly disintegrate and backlash, it successfully attracted more of Roland's attention. Under various subtle coincidences, he held the dagger and successfully approached Roland. Then, without changing his expression, Roland moved his free left hand, grabbed the arm holding the dagger, disarmed him and snatched the dagger from his hand. At the same time, he waved the staff and hit him directly on the head. Finally, the spell held in Roland's hand was released instantly. Second-level spell Mental Shock. As the mental shock entered his body, he tilted his head and fainted. Then, Roland looked at the open space aside and said lightly. "Now that you're here, come out." As Roland finished speaking, a shadow appeared in the clearing. Then, the shadow faded, and a 3-ring transcendent appeared in the clearing. Compared to the prophecy spellcaster who had fallen to the ground, he was much more polite. After appearing, he greeted Roland politely. Roland did not return the greeting, looked at him and said coldly. "If we can send a 3rd-ring transcendent as a guard, will we not be able to find out the true situation?" "Humph, take him away from here. If there is a next time, I won't hold back." After speaking, Roland turned and left without waiting for his reply. The 3-ring transcendent didn't say anything. He walked to the caster who fell on the ground, picked him up on his back, and then turned into a shadow and disappeared from the place. After watching the invisible men leave, Roland really relaxed. Tisk, wild 3-ring transcendents are miserable. In order to get promoted, they have to work for the academy and take care of the young masters of the academy. That's right, Roland could tell at a glance that the guard was a wild transcendent. It can be seen from the quality of his magic and the non-standard transcendental skills. Roland did not discriminate against him. He just worked for the academy for his own future, which was fine. And there are many wild transcendents who want to work for the academy. If he can succeed, his strength must be strong. If the wild transcendents who kill step by step fight with the transcendents of the same ring in the academy, they will not necessarily lose. After Roland lay down on the chair again, Hela also released the spell in her hand, randomly selected a lucky person from the lake, and continued her study. In a room in Tianyun City, as a shadow emerged, the guard appeared in the room with the caster on his back. He first put the spell caster on his back on the bed, took out a bottle of alchemy potion and fed it to him, then took out a transparent crystal from his arms, operated it a few times, and whispered something. "Yes, I understand." The guard nodded and whispered. Then, he put away the white crystal and silently waited for the spellcaster to wake up by the bed. After waiting for an unknown period of time, the spellcaster on the bed suddenly jumped up and pressed his hand on the ring on his finger. However, after seeing the surrounding environment and the presence of the guard, he was also a little confused. Before he could say anything, the guard next to him handed him a photo stone and whispered. "This is what your excellency asked me to give it to you. It will answer your doubts." "What do you mean?" The spellcaster took the photo stone and said with some doubt while injecting magic power to open the photo stone. The guard did not speak, turned into a shadow and disappeared in the room. Just when the spellcaster was confused, the photo stone finally started. Obscene sounds rang in the room. Chapter 56. With Roland's 3-ring strength, it is naturally no problem to occupy an area outside the Kes Mountains. Basically, there will be no blind adventurers or extraordinary creatures who will come to seek death. Therefore, after sending away the prophecy spellcaster, Roland and Hela's daily life became dull. With the large amount of resources provided by the ruins, Roland and Hela do not need to run around for resources, but only need to improve themselves step by step. Originally, according to Roland's plan, he had to go to Tianyun City to buy a batch of daily necessities almost every 1 or 2 months. After all, there was no food in the ruins. Google searched Can. However, since he settled next to the lake, in order to kill time, Roland opened up a piece of farmland and planted some crops. Since Roland just wanted to kill time and did not really want to do farm work, he relied on spells to plant the land, and the efficiency was quite high. Coupled with the birth effect of the life spell, Roland's farmland, which he planted for fun, produced a large amount of food and vegetables. In addition, Hela planted crops to familiarize herself with life spells. The result was that Roland and Hela could not finish the crops they planted. Therefore, after being self-sufficient in food, Roland was too lazy to go to Tianyun City every 1 or 2 months, and ate the food he planted directly. As for the output of meat, just randomly pick a lucky person who came to the lake to drink water. However, after planting the fields for a few months, the grain reserves filled the several wooden warehouses newly built by Roland. In order to avoid the excess food from being left to rot, Roland changed direction and cultivated various trees. Based on his experience in his previous life, Roland planned to create various rare trees that would be born in the future in advance, and prepare to use them to make a set of spellcaster suits for himself and Hela. Although the foreign trade version of the elf robe sent by the elf ambassador is good, it is only good for low-level use. After reaching the 4th ring, it can provide less help. Buying a better quality robe from the Spellcaster Association is expensive and troublesome. Roland thought about it and thought it would be better to prepare the materials in advance and do it himself. Looking at the golden tree in front of him, Roland reached out and broke off a piece of bark. Looking at the bark in his hand, Roland threw it into the basin beside him. With the effect of the alchemical potion in the basin, the bark began to dissolve, and combined with the alchemical potion, it became a golden sticky ball that was glued together. Then, Roland reached out and picked up the golden sticky ball, injected magic power, and began to shape its structure. Under the effect of magic power, the sticky ball began to spread around and turned into a thin small round shield. Finally, Roland mobilized the fire element and fixed it with high temperature. It seems to have succeeded. Looking at the small round shield in his hand, Roland tapped it with his fingers, with a thoughtful look on his face. This is a good thing to save your life. The shield made of bark is not only light and comfortable, but also has excellent magic resistance, which can effectively weaken the effects of most spells. In the previous life, this material was more often processed and hardened into armor to arm soldiers against extraordinary people. However, for Roland now, it is just a material for making shirts and pants. After thinking about it, Roland threw the small round shield in his hand, and directly rubbed a one-ring fireball spell with his hand and smashed it. Bang! The small round shield was directly knocked away by Roland. Then, the grey crow flew through the air and caught the flying small round shield. It looked at the golden small round shield in its claws curiously. "Throw it over!" Looking at the grey crow, Roland shouted at it. Although Roland had nothing to do with the grey crow, theoretically he didn't have to listen to Roland, but it still threw the small round shield in its claws back. Second ring spell Pyroblast. Aiming at the small round shield thrown over, Roland cast a spell again. Bang! The small round shield was blown away again. The grey crow flapped its wings and caught the small round shield that was knocked away again, but as soon as it caught it, its claws were burned by the hot round shield and it quickly threw the round shield out. Roland stretched out his hand and caught the hot round shield with magic. Although it is not as good as the product that has been iterated many times in the previous life, it is already very good. Looking at the round shield that is emitting heat, Roland nodded slightly. Although it looks hot, the round shield still withstands it and is not directly blown to pieces. When it is further processed and enchanted, the defense will be even higher. Looking at the golden tree in front of him, Roland picked the fruit it produced with magic, threw it on the nearby land, and injected the life spell that nourishes the plants, preparing to cultivate a few more. Although if all the bark of a tree is used, it is definitely enough to rub 2 sets. However, the quality of the bark produced is different. Roland has a lot of time anyway, so he must carefully select it. Then, Roland turned his eyes to another test product. A group of short trees covered with blue leaves. His leaves are the materials that Roland is going to use to make robes and spellcasting props. Through special alchemical potions, the leaves are transformed into pulp, which is made into paper with strong magical properties, toughness and softness, and then the magic books and robes are made from this paper. This kind of material with strong magic performance is best used to make magic books to assist in casting spells. Although it is not bad to make robes, it is not particularly suitable. However, Roland has limited conditions, so he can only make do with it for now. Although Roland knows some good materials for making robes, these materials are either monopolized and controlled by major forces or have not yet been invented. Although Roland knows these materials that have not yet been invented, invention also requires a foundation, and the production areas of these materials are too far away from Roland. For example, there is a kind of special silk that needs to be woven from the silk spit out by cave spiders. Although Roland knows how to raise cave spiders and how to weave silk, these cave spiders are in the Dragon Ridge Mountains, and there are no cave spiders on the Kess Mountains. If he wants to go to the Dragon Ridge Mountains, Roland has to pass by, or even pass through Donner. That is too far and too dangerous. So Roland can only make do with it for now. Anyway, no matter how bad it is better than most materials of this era. Since papermaking requires a lot of leaves, Roland planted more than 50 of these trees. Roland checked their growth status and walked away after confirming that there was no problem. After Roland left, the one-ring undead also walked over with an empty wooden basin and collected all the mature leaves from the trees one by one. At the same time, it also dragged a large bucket and slowly watered each tree. Chapter 57. Although the days in the Kess Mountains were ordinary and without any surprises, for Roland and Hela, such ordinary days were good. In the lake cabin, Roland and Hela spent a peaceful year. During this year, Roland rebalanced the magic power in his body, the influence of the dark elements was reversed, and the slightly undead organs returned to their original appearance. Among them, his eyes turned red again. At the same time, Roland took care of the special trees he planted, and through a year of meditation, his strength was also improved to the limit of the 3rd ring. As for Hela, she first learned all the extraordinary knowledge of the 2nd ring of the dead and life system taught by Roland in the first half of the year, and in the second half of the year, she learned to use positive and negative energy spells. After balancing the positive and negative energy in her body, she was promoted to the 3rd ring naturally. In addition to his own development, Roland also explored most of the ruins underground. Since several warehouses have been found, the materials collected are enough for Roland and Hela. Therefore, in order to prevent the sublimation of the 4th ring from being affected by the blessing of the undead sub-plane, Roland did not directly use the High Priest's staff to clear the undead community found in the ruins, but chose to take a detour. After a year of unremitting exploration, the entire ruins, except for a few areas blocked by powerful undead creatures and the core areas that could not be cracked due to insufficient strength, other places have basically been mastered by Roland. In the large open space in front of the wooden house, Roland was preparing to advance to the fourth ring. In addition to the basic magic array used to gather and bind elements, Roland also used a large amount of extraordinary materials to refine a large barrel of elemental liquid that is easy to absorb and contains a large amount of elements and energy. Because the extraordinary materials invested are large and expensive, these elemental liquids are particularly viscous, as if they are a slightly weaker solid. Moreover, the wooden barrels used to store elemental liquids are not made of ordinary wood, which cannot bear it at all. They are made of golden bark that Roland personally cultivated before. The sublimation of the fourth ring requires a large amount of elements and energy as fuel. For school mages, they don't have to think about the issue of elements and energy. Basically, the famous schools in the Tower of Truth will specially prepare special venues with abundant elements and energy to meet the needs of school mages for promotion and sublimation. However, wild mages without backing can only find ways on their own. Either save money and then apply to the Tower of Truth, or find an environment with rich elements by themselves, or prepare extraordinary materials in advance. Although Roland has a lot of silver points, it is enough to apply to a small school, but it is not safe. The current Tower of Truth is not a good place. If wild mages go there to promote, if they are unlucky and are targeted, they may be directly abducted and become experimental materials for some great mages. Roland doesn't want to gamble. In addition to the basic preparations, Roland has prepared backups for various situations that may be encountered in the first sublimation based on his experience in his previous life. Since there were too many materials found in the ruins, Roland spent more than 2 months carefully preparing more than 20 bottles of alchemical potions to assist sublimation and solve problems that may be encountered in sublimation. The reason why it took so long was mainly because most of the materials Roland used to refine alchemical potions were dark element materials. In the past, Roland could ignore this influence and adjust it slowly later, but the first sublimation of the fourth ring could not be played like this. If it was affected during the sublimation, it would be too troublesome to adjust it again, and the cost was not small. Therefore, Roland chose to spend some time to neutralize the dark element content in the alchemical potion. In addition to these preparations, in order to avoid being affected by external factors, Roland also arranged layers of defense and hidden formations around the wooden house in the past year. Even if a high-ring mage came, as long as he was not a space mage, Roland was confident that he could complete the sublimation before he broke through all the defenses. Standing on the open space, Roland activated the formation on the ground. Then, elements from all directions began to converge towards the center of the magic circle. "I'm going to start." Standing in front of the wooden barrel, Roland looked at Hela not far away and said, "Yeah." She nodded, then turned around and sat on the ground with her back to him. Hela was the last guarantee. If she was really unlucky and a high-level spellcaster passed by and came in with malicious intent, Hela would activate the teleportation array on the periphery and teleport the entire area away. Although this would cause Roland to be disturbed by the power of space, causing his sublimation to tend towards space. However, it is better to spend some money to reverse this change than to have his sublimation interrupted by force. After Hela turned around, Roland also calmly took off all his clothes and entered the wooden barrel naked. After contacting Roland's skin, the gentle elements and energy began to actively flow into Roland's body. Roland did not refuse. While actively absorbing the elements and energy that were flowing in, he closed his eyes and began to meditate. Roland entered a state of deep meditation almost instantly, and came to his soul world, and saw his humanoid soul. Under the guidance of the meditation method, the humanoid soul sat cross-legged in mid-air, and then, a large amount of dense energy emerged from its body out of thin air. This humanoid soul, which had evolved 3 times and was becoming clearer and clearer, began to sublimate with this energy under the impetus of meditation and Roland's will. The first soul sublimation of the caster began. The vague figure of the humanoid soul became clearer and clearer, and its appearance began to evolve into Roland's. After an unknown amount of time, the soul looked almost exactly like Roland. Then, the soul, which was originally like a doll, suddenly blinked and became full of spiritual energy. It was as if a doll suddenly came to life. Roland lowered his head and adapted to this special body. His soul was completely controlled by him at this moment. Before this soul only belonged to him. Although the feeling at the moment was a bit strange, Roland still knew the importance of it. After quickly adapting, he began the next step of sublimation. Feeling the protective film outside the soul's body, which protected but also restrained the soul's growth, Roland began to control it and tried to actively contact this protective film. However, this was not easy. His soul had long been accustomed to this protective film. If Roland wanted to completely remove it, he would have to fight against his own soul instincts. Chapter 58. It's like a person with severe misophobia who washes himself clean at home and changes into a set of clothes that he has treasured for many years, but finds that there is a pile of shit outside the door. He just wants to hide in the room and doesn't want to go out at all. On the one hand, in Roland's subjective consciousness, he wants to remove the protective film and sublimate his soul. On the other hand, in Roland's passive instinct, he doesn't want to step out of his comfort zone and the protection of the protective film. Under the confrontation between these two consciousnesses, Roland has no good way but to stick to his subjective consciousness and fight against his passive instinct. Under this confrontation, the protective film on his body's surface will be quickly repaired as soon as it is untied a little. However, in the gap between untied and repaired, a drop of blue liquid fell from Roland's body. In the constant confrontation with himself, drops of blue liquid kept flowing out. After an unknown period of time, Roland's soul body almost shrank a lot. And below the soul body, the blue liquid that flowed out also gathered into a small puddle. After seeing the puddle, Roland came back to his senses and found that his consciousness seemed to be somewhat scattered. In response, Roland decisively gave orders to his body. Lying on the wooden barrel, Roland's body unconsciously picked up the alchemy potion on the cabinet beside him, opened it, and drank it expressionlessly. As the alchemy potion entered his body, a cool feeling also surged into Roland's heart, so his consciousness also gathered again in this cool feeling. I still underestimated the difficulty of sublimation. In the game of the previous life, sublimation was to play a small game similar to Tetris, and the collapse of consciousness was just a debuff, which would make the blocks seen by the player different from the actual blocks. As long as there was a debuff, just drink a sip of alchemy potion. However, in the real world, Roland did not have a status bar, so he did not find that his spirit was broken at all. If he did not react, Roland's sublimation might have failed this time. Although Roland seemed to attach great importance to sublimation and had made sufficient preparations, he had been smooth sailing since he awakened his memories of his previous life, and he also developed contempt for the extraordinary power of this world. Since there was not much time to waste, Roland simply reflected on himself, and put away his contempt for sublimation as much as possible, and devoted himself to sublimation. After Roland devoted himself to sublimation for an unknown period of time, his soul body had shrunk by 1/3, and the small puddle under the soul body had also turned into a small puddle. Almost enough. Roland sensed the free puddle below. With the support of these blue liquids that had separated from the soul body, Roland's subjective consciousness was able to suppress his soul instincts. Roland calmed down, and after silently accumulating strength for a while, he completely untied the outer protective membrane of the soul body. In an instant, the entire soul body seemed like a ball of water in the air, and the whole body fell down quickly. Roland's soul body was completely untied and turned into a small puddle. Roland's consciousness also merged into the puddle, and his soul essence was completely changed. Then, the power that had surged in the soul body before began to surge in the puddle. The blue liquid absorbed this power, and without restraint, they began to grow and expand rapidly, and Roland's soul strength and will began to soar. Under the continuous expansion, the original puddle eventually expanded into a small lake full of spiritual energy. Although it is still relatively small now, the official scientific name of the lake is the Sea of Soul. Finally, after sublimating into the Sea of Soul, Roland's will that merged into the Sea of Soul also began to spread outward, stretched out of the Sea of Soul, and reconnected to his body. Finally, Roland opened his eyes. After completing the sublimation, his soul also began to feed back to the body, and countless elements and energies began to reshape his body. Roland finally took the first step of inhumanity. The real dividing point between the knight and the caster can actually be said to be the beginning of the sublimation of the fourth ring. The knight sublimates the body, and uses the sublimated body to promote the evolution of the soul. The caster sublimates the soul, and uses the sublimated soul to feed back the evolution of the body. Of course, it's not that no one has tried dual cultivation, trying to sublimate the body and soul at the same time when they are at the fourth ring, but the success rate is very low, and the effect is not as good as they imagined. The price of simultaneous sublimation is that the body is not as good as the knight, and the soul is not as good as the caster, mediocre and without any special outstanding advantages. In addition, there has never been a particularly powerful and famous existence among the extraordinary people who choose dual cultivation. Therefore, in this human world, few people take the path of dual cultivation. In addition, after the sublimation of the fourth ring, the extraordinary people also begin to have a gap with ordinary people. Spellcasters are better. The body of a fourth ring spellcaster can still be considered an ordinary person. He can have children with ordinary people. He has to continue to be promoted to the fifth ring, or even the sixth ring, and the body continues to evolve before there will be a reproductive gap with ordinary people. However, the fourth ring knight is different. After completing the sublimation of the body, they basically have a reproductive gap with ordinary people. At this point, if the extraordinary people still want to have children, they can only find other extraordinary people. After several days, Roland finally completed the evolution of his body. Hey! Roland stood up. A large bucket full of elemental liquid was now only a thin layer submerged in the clear water. He did not intend to waste it, and directly absorbed all the remaining elemental liquid, converted it into magic power, and filled it into his body. Then, he walked out of the barrel, put his clothes back on, and walked towards Hela in front of him. Roland walked up to her, looked at her dirty appearance, and asked softly. "How long has it been?" 23 days. Hela turned her head and responded while looking at Roland curiously. "Did it succeed?" "Well, it worked. I'm already a 4th level spellcaster." Roland nodded slightly, and the huge spiritual power emanated from his body. At the same time, looking at Hela, he said gently. "Didn't you take any rest during the past 23 days?" Hela blinked and did not answer. However, even if she didn't answer, Roland could tell by looking at the tiredness and dirty appearance in her eyes. "Thanks for your hard work." Looking at Hela, Roland said softly. "I'll be here next, so you should have a good rest first." Hela also nodded. After seeing Roland, all the tiredness she had suppressed surged up. She walked back to the wooden house slowly, lying down without even changing her clothes. Chapter 59. A fourth ring spellcaster is a very important force in any place in this world. Even in the Silver Empire of Sinner and the Second Phoenix Empire in the southeast, 2 countries that value the cultivation of spellcasters, a fourth ring spellcaster is also a backbone force that can step onto the political stage. In the Silver Empire, regardless of race, as long as a fourth ring spellcaster is willing to surrender, an honorary noble title recognized by the Emperor will be immediately delivered to him, and there are many Grand Dukes, Kings and Electors who are willing to use real territory in exchange for the loyalty of a fourth ring spellcaster. In the Second Phoenix Empire, the Sun Elves who almost look down on any race except elves will also give due respect. However, compared with the generous Silver Empire, the Sun Elves are much more stingy. Unless they are elves, even if they surrender, they will only be given an honorary noble title at most, and real territory is impossible. Even if he remains independent, neutral, and does not surrender to any force or country, the strength of the fourth ring is enough for him to gain respect and attention anywhere. Unless it is absolutely necessary, basically no one will take the initiative to provoke a fourth ring spellcaster. Roland stood in front of the lake, with a huge amount of mental power pouring out of his body. He calmly stretched out his right finger and pointed it at the lake. Fourth ring spell freeze. A huge amount of magic power turned into a cold light and flew out from Roland's finger, rushing straight into the center of the lake. Then, starting from the center of the lake, the entire lake froze at an astonishing speed. In less than a minute, the lake in front of him stopped flowing and was completely frozen. At the same time, all the living things in the lake quickly lost signs of life in this cold. After completing the spell, Roland first thoughtfully adapted to the casting process and intensity control of the fourth ring spell. Then, he cast the spell again. Fourth ring spell Flame Storm. Under Roland's micro-manipulation, a small fiery red tornado slowly formed on the lake and slowly fell above the center of the lake. Its foot touched the lake, and then a large amount of heat energy flowed into the lake. Under Roland's operation, the huge heat energy did not boil the entire lake, but only thawed the lake. As the ice began to melt, Roland controlled the flame storm while casting a spell again. Fourth ring spell Blessing of Life. A thick life force formed in Roland's hands, and under Roland's control, it was accurately injected into all the frozen life forms in the lake. With these 2 delicate operations, Roland spent almost 5 minutes before he finished the spell in his hand. Except for a few fish near the center of the lake that had been completely cooked by the high temperature and could not be rescued, the lake in front of him was exactly the same as before. After trying several spells, Roland regained the feel of the fourth ring spell. For Roland, who has mastered a large number of spells, the intermediate spells of the fourth to sixth rings are more embarrassing. In his previous life, Roland used the account of a legendary spellcaster most of the time, so the most used spells were high-level spells of the 7th to 9th rings, as well as legendary spells. As for the low-level spells of the 1st to 3rd rings, Roland used them frequently. After all, when fighting a small monster or clearing a few miscellaneous soldiers, he couldn't cast a high-level spell. Therefore, Roland was in an awkward position with the mid-level spells. In terms of power, they were not as powerful as the high-level spells, but in terms of consumption, they were higher than the low-level spells. Therefore, Roland used the mid-level spells very rarely, so he also needed some practice to get familiar with the mid-level spells. However, this was not a good place to practice. Roland raised his head and looked around. The power of the fourth ring spells was still quite large. If he practiced here, it would not take long for Roland to destroy this area. Although this outer area was not uncommon in the entire Kess Mountains, Roland still had some feelings for it after living there for more than a year and was unwilling to ruin it. When Hela wakes up, he should go to the ruins to practice. Roland thought silently. The laboratory in the ruins should be able to withstand it. After making a decision, Roland gave up practicing and turned to the wooden table next to the cabin. He picked up the paper on the wooden table and sat on the wooden stool. The paper was a special paper made by Roland using blue leaves. However, the paper on the table was the material that Roland planned to use to make a magic book. In addition to using various extraordinary materials to make an excellent magic book, the spells recorded on it are also a very important part. If the spells recorded are enough and strong enough, the quality of the magic book will be stronger. Of course, spells cannot be recorded randomly. It is best to use spells that the user knows. If the materials used are the same, the blank magic book is naturally not as effective as the staff, but if the spells recorded are enough, the magic book is stronger than the staff. For Roland, who has mastered a large number of spells, the magic book is undoubtedly his best choice. Moreover, Roland is not a Superman, and his memories of his previous life are not all clear. If he was not a professional player in his previous life and the game was his livelihood, he would not remember so many valuable things. Therefore, in order to avoid forgetting some spells, Roland also wanted to record them all in advance. So, the papers that Roland picked up were densely packed with a large number of spells, most of which were profound and complex high-level spells, as well as legendary spells. The remaining ordinary spells were all carefully selected by Roland, and were of higher value. Looking at the dense records on the pages, Roland recalled that he had racked his brains to recall various spells and recorded his memories in the past year, and sighed helplessly. As it turned out, he was completely overthinking. After being promoted to the fourth ring and completing the sublimation of his soul, Roland recalled all his memories of his previous life. Not to mention spells, Roland even recalled some strange machine knowledge that he had only read once or twice, and he remembered it clearly. The sublimation in the game only doubled the various attributes of the player, but the sublimation in the real world is a real evolution. After the sublimation, Roland felt that his brain seemed to have evolved, his thinking ability increased significantly, his learning ability continued to rise, and everything he saw was directly imprinted in his brain. Even those boring and incomprehensible theories in the memory of the previous life can be understood now. If Roland had this memory and thinking speed, why would he play games? He would have been in the research institute and contributed to the scientific research of the human union. Maybe, with his upgraded brain, he could even study the legendary third-generation superluminal engine. Roland shook his head, threw away the distracting thoughts in his mind, picked up the paper and began to check it page by page. After all, it was something that had not been sublimated before, and some of the records were not accurate. I was free anyway, so I might as well revise it. I have something to do, so there is only one update today. Chapter 60. Cold. Google search for Urtkin. The biting cold wind seemed to surround her whole body. Hela subconsciously curled up. It was as if she was hallucinating. The flames and blood that filled her entire field of vision, the tragic deaths of her relatives and friends, the hideous cultists, the cold and ruthless cage, and the countless pairs of eyes staring at her, filled with madness. These scenes seemed to appear in her field of vision again, and they kept looping in a high speed and chaotic order. In the constant loop, her consciousness began to blur, as if she had returned to the time when she was weak and powerless. She subconsciously clenched her teeth, and her body trembled unnaturally. She was ruthlessly dragged to the altar by the cultists, and then a black and terrifying head appeared above the altar. She felt endless fear, and then the head opened its mouth, and her body and soul were separated. In her desperate gaze, her soul and body were swallowed by the head one after another. Countless dark elements washed over her soul. Her fear was taken away, and what followed was despair, madness, and fear. All emotions were taken away, and she became an emotionless monster. She opened her eyes and saw the dark sky and the white earth paved with countless bones. Her vision began to rise, and she saw countless skeletons of the dead, and she was also an inconspicuous existence among them. Her vision rose again until she could no longer see herself. Finally, her eyes flickered slightly. She heard the children's cries, saw the disintegrating tribes, and saw the cultists who succeeded in the conspiracy grinning. She saw the darkness covering the entire Northland and spreading around at an alarming speed, dyeing the whole world black. Looking at the black world, Hela didn't feel anything. She should be afraid. Hela thought so. Is death the destination of the world? Suddenly, everything in front of Hela quickly fell apart. A gentle white light shone in front of Hela. Although she had lost all her emotions and had no relevant memories, she couldn't help but stretch out her right hand when she saw the warm light in front of her. When she stretched out her hand, she found that her arm seemed a little different. She was stunned for a moment when she looked at her pale and dry arm. What is this? My hand? Just as she was thinking, the light in front of her eyes seemed to be a little impatient, and suddenly expanded several times, completely wrapping her up. A cool feeling quickly flooded into her mind. The world that was falling apart in front of her also completely decomposed and disappeared. She seemed to fall into a warm embrace, all the darkness disappeared completely, and the biting cold quickly dissipated, as if it was expelled. Then, she came to a white world and saw a boy standing in front of her. He stretched out his right hand to her and said with a smile, "Let's burn all the sins to ashes together." She blinked her eyes, and the lost feelings quickly returned to her. Yet, she nodded vigorously, stretched out her hand and held his hand. Finally, she opened her eyes. Sitting on a wooden chair, Roland listened to Hela's description and said thoughtfully, "Is this all you encountered?" "Yes." Hela nodded and asked with some doubt, "Why do I have such a nightmare?" "Strictly speaking, this should not be considered an ordinary dream." Roland shook his head and said, "If it was just an ordinary nightmare, it would not affect your soul. If I hadn't discovered it in time and used magic to pull you back, you might really turn into the person in the dream." Roland was still outside slowly revising the pages of the book, and suddenly found that there was a strange magical fluctuation coming from the wooden house. When he ran in, he found that Hela's body and soul on the bed were undergoing an uncontrolled transformation. After checking and finding that Hela's soul was a little confused, and her whole body was transforming into a dead spirit, Roland decisively took action, forcibly interrupted the transformation, and comforted her soul. Hela tilted her head, her eyes were still full of doubts. Although Roland didn't quite understand what Hela was facing, after all, players in the previous life would not encounter such a situation. Who the hell would sleep in the game? However, after recalling all the memories of the previous life, Roland said hesitantly, "Everything you saw is not quite in line with the real situation. The undead subplane has no entity, and with your qualifications, even if you are sacrificed, you will not be transformed into an ordinary skeleton undead." "Well, have you read some novels about the undead recently?" Roland suddenly asked. Hela was stunned for a moment, thought for a while, and took out a book from the bookcase beside the bed. Looking at it, he said hesitantly, "It seems to be similar to what is recorded in this book." Roland took the book from his hand, flipped through it briefly, and said, "Well, it doesn't seem to be a precognitive dream. It should be because you haven't rested for too long, your soul is a little weak, and you have only a little knowledge of the undead subplane. In addition, there is still the fear of cultists in my heart when I was weak." Roland added in his heart. Although she had become a superhuman, and was still following Roland to kill the cultists in the north, uprooting the entire cult organization, the fear she had when she was weak still lurked in her heart. If she had not been vigilant for dozens of days and her soul had not become weak, this fear would not be a big problem. "Is that so?" Hela nodded, looking thoughtful. "Speaking of which, let's burn all the sins to ashes together." "Where did you see this sentence?" Roland flipped through the storybook in his hand and said happily. Hearing what Hela said, the thoughts in her head were instantly thrown out of her mind, Her face flushed, and she was very embarrassed. This. That. Roland chuckled, closed the book in his hand, and put it back to its original place in the bookshelf. Are you hungry after sleeping for so long? Hella nodded shyly. Well, then you can lie down for a while. Drink this potion first. I'll go prepare lunch for you. Roland stood up, took out a bottle of soul-recovering alchemy potion from his space ring and placed it on the bedside table. He stood up and looked at the weather outside the wooden house and said. After watching Roland walk out of the wooden house, the shyness on Hella's face faded a little. After relaxing on the bed for a while, she reached out and took the alchemy potion from the bedside table and drank it. After drinking the alchemy potion, Hella also felt a lot more energetic. Then, she suddenly realized something, lowered her head, saw her dirty clothes, and also smelled a strange smell on her body. Ah! Hella, who suddenly realized that she had been communicating with Roland in this way just now, her mind went blank in an instant.